council meeting, and this one I'm going to just go back to the one about the weather, since our farmers are probably getting well sick of the rain. So, whakatake hau ki te uru, whakatake hau ki te tonga, kia makinakina ki uta, kia mataratara ki tai, ehi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, ti hei, mō. Cease the winds from the west, cease the winds from the south. Let the breeze blow over the land, let the breeze blow over the ocean. Let the red-tipped dawn come with a sharpened air, a touch of frost, no more rain, and a promise of a glorious day.
I do without the frost too, actually.
Welcome along to our council meeting on the 2nd of October, and a special welcome to our Environment Southland. The toilets are just outside the chamber there on your right. If you need to evacuate, head down the stairs and the assembly points on the Bay Street car park. So earthquake drop cover and hold. Please make sure that our phones are on silent mode for this meeting. And these proceedings are being recorded for the purpose of live video, both live streaming and downloading. So by remaining in this meeting, you consent to being filmed for viewing by the public. Right, I've got an apology for lateness from Councillor Menzies. For that apology, please. Councillor Boat, seconded by Councillor Duffy. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Carried. Do we have any leave of absence coming up? There being none. Do we have any conflict of interest for any items on the agenda today from any councillors?
I will just bring to the attention of the council that I was one of the submitters. I submitted as an individual to the long-term plan, regional climate change plan, and because I focused on the science, and today we are more about the process, because as I read in the paper presented, the science will be subject to the part 2 of this one. So I will be taking proceedings with an open mind. Thank you.
Thank you. So you're happy to take part in the...
Yeah.
I don't believe we've got any extraordinary... We do. Oh, look at that. There's a whole bit of reading in front of me. Mia needs to read his paperwork. So we've got a late item for the agenda today, which I'm going to put agreement for the item to be considered. This is the Regional Climate Change Strategy for Murihiku Southland Phase 1. The item was originally circulated with the agenda on Friday the 27th of September, but had an incorrect attachment appended. The agenda was amended to remove the report and incorrect attachment, so the report with the correct attachment was then circulated on Monday the 30th of September. The item 7.1, Regional Climate Change Strategy for Murihiku Southland Phase 1, could wait until a later meeting, but to keep the process in motion, it would be wise to consider the item today, as other councils in the region have already adopted the strategy. So I'll move from the chair the motion that the council, pursuant to section 48A of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987, considers the item 7.1 Regional Climate Change Strategy for Murihiku Southland Phase 1. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Fraser. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against?
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll declare that carried.
Can I have a moment to speak to my concerns here?
Not really with because I've already put the motion.
Okay.
Probably not, sorry.
Sure. Thank you.
I've got the confirmation of council minutes on page 6 of the agenda, so that's for our meeting back at Collett Bay on the 18th of September. Do I have someone happy to move? Councillor Rutherford, that's correct, seconded by Councillor Duffy. Any discussion on the minutes? I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? That is carried. I don't believe we've got any public participation today.
No.
But we do have a workshop, so I will move from the chair that we adjourn the meeting for the purpose of the climate change workshop. Councillor Duffy. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? That's carried. Right, so I'll welcome Phil, Marcus and Rochelle. Sorry. Welcome along, Phil.
Driving the presentation? Yes, why not?
There we go.
Can.
All yours. Up there. Oh, yeah, when it unfreeze the screen.
Well, thank you and good morning, everyone. It's not great to return and to talk to this particular topic. And the reason why we're here and why we're doing this this workshop is at a council meeting earlier in the year on the 24th of January when we asked this council to endorse the proposed strategy for public consultation. There was an additional motion agreed to that the working group feedback be shared with a wider audience, including a workshop with the Southland District Council. So that's the reason why I'm here this morning, to meet that requirement. If I could speak first of all then to the public consultation process that was undertaken. Environment Southland was the lead agency on that on behalf of all of the councils in Te Ao Marama. It was run in parallel but separate to our own council LTP public consultation. There was a hearing panel formed to consider the submissions. That consisted of the 5 names, one from each of the key organisations collaborating on this strategy. The public consultation period opened on the 29th of February, and that was the same day that the ICC public consultation opened as the first council to open its public consultation. And it was closed on the 8th of May, which was the period when Gore District Council was due to close its public consultation period. We conducted public hearings for those who wanted to speak to their submissions on the 16th of May, and then the hearing panel met for deliberations on 2 occasions, 20 May and 20 June. So, in terms of the feedback that the council was interested in hearing, we grouped those into themes, and there are 5 broad themes grouped, and I've got a few bullet points on each of these themes to speak to by way of feedback and what emerged from the hearing process, the public consultation process. So the first one was a Southland community mandate for progressing a collaborative climate change strategy. I've got 2 slides on this particular theme because there was really some mixed messages we were receiving from the community on this one. So on the first slide here, I've kind of collected all of the more negative responses that we were getting. That the climate has been changing for millions of years and will continue to do so. There was scepticism of climate change expressed. The fact that climate change action in Southland will not make any difference to the global effects of climate change. There was a clear mistrust of science that the council is using, and there was opposition to modelling expressed. In the same theme, however, there was also support for councils identifying climate change as a priority. There was, on the other side of the coin, support for science underpinning the action, support for modelling, and a very broad support for a collaborative regional approach in response to climate change. And if I could just pause and just share one insight here, was that there was some clear patterns emerged on this particular theme. As individuals who submitted, we got quite mixed or split feedback from individuals. What was interesting that whenever there was organisations submitting, there was consistent support from organisations as they responded to the feedback opportunity. In terms of how many or what is the mix of organisations versus individuals, we had a total of about 60 submissions, and of those 10 were from various organisations, the likes of Health New Zealand, Forest and Bird, Federated Farmers, Community Trust, Heritage New Zealand, The Future is Rail, Fonterra, Fish and Game, Department of Conservation, and the QE2 National Trust. I just thought it was interesting to observe that split pattern between organisations versus individuals. The next principle, the next recommendation or theme was relating to the principles and making equity more evident, more visible, more clear within those principles listed, and that was one amendment that we certainly acted upon in the strategy. The next theme was recommendations in respect of the aspirations themselves. There was support for Southland becoming a net zero region by 2050. Some were pushing us to go for an earlier goal, 2030 or 2040 in some cases. In some cases, there was opposition to the idea of Southland becoming a net zero region by 2050. There were recommendations for refinements to the aspirations and opposition to the aspiration to generate regional climate change action. So you can see there was this pattern of people falling clearly in favour or clearly not in favour of what was being proposed in the strategy. The framework for action, there was feedback that the strategy on its own is not enough and actions need to be taken, and we as a climate change working group understood that from the outset, that it would always require that phase 2, the framework for action would be needed to complement the phase 1 strategy. And there was concern expressed about the cost to ratepayers of regional climate change action, although nothing in the strategy indicated or committed to a particular course of action. That will be something that is yet to be determined in our phase 2 work and subsequent to this. But it was certainly noted that that's something that we need to pay attention to in our phase 2 work. Other themes and recommendations that came through, people were very supportive of the need for a precautionary approach, given the uncertainty associated with climate change and its effects. Again, strong calls for as much transparency as can be generated as we continue with our work in this area. There was some who were advocating strongly for consideration of nature-based solutions as within the mix of responses to climate change challenges. Gravel was mentioned in terms of the managing gravel more effectively in our rivers and floodplains to mitigate risk of flooding. And we had included some statistics from Great South report on the regional greenhouse gas profile. Some were concerned that at the accuracy of that, so we certainly took the opportunity to clarify the source of that and update, make it clear where that data had come from, so that people could look up the original source of that data themselves. And I guess just to conclude on all those things is just to flag that the next phase of work has already commenced, and that's on developing a framework for action which will complement the phase 1 strategy. A big part of that is pursuing regional alignment. We know that much of the action that might be explored and initiated may be managed at each individual council level. But we also anticipate there may yet be collaborative projects that are identified where one or more council or councils with other agencies may choose to collaborate on certain initiatives that support climate action in Southland. Part of that is ongoing mana whenua and community collaboration, and as part of the feedback we got through the public consultation process, a call for more opportunity for public input. We do have plans to convene a community hui in the next few months to provide more opportunity for people to feedback and provide input to the framework for action development. I will pause at that point and take questions and thoughts from the floor.
Any questions? Anything you wanted to add at all?
Well, thanks, Phil, for coming along. I mean, the workshop was requested by council at the last time. That the consultation piece was discussed, so it was assuming that based on the feedback and the process, there may be some questions around submissions. What's been put forward there in the workshop is representative of the process. There was a good level of submissions. There was some difference of opinions on different things, but the areas of commonality was that support the regional approach, and that's essentially what the strategy in its final proposed form highlights. As far as the framework for action, that's the thing that's going to have some teeth in it to maybe come up with action points that might need discussion, costings, that kind of thing. But as far as the overarching strategy, probably a longer process to get to the end of phase one, but we're there now, and the other councils have endorsed, and it's kind of waiting on us and ES to see whether we fit into that regional alignment.
Any further, Councillor Chamberlain?
Yeah, thanks. Phil, what have you worked on any actions as such? You know, where the councils could align themselves?
Yeah, no, there's actually a number have emerged, and we've been dealing and diving into those in more detail through the phase 2 work that's been continuing. Some of them are really obvious, like simply agreeing as we move into the future, what are the climate change scenarios which are appropriate that we all agree should guide our further analysis, for example. Environment Southland has got investment secured through our LTP plan to invest more heavily in science, for example. That will inform all of the council's thinking on what are the appropriate climate change actions. Those are a couple of examples that spring to mind. We had about, more than 60 or more scattered across tabletops last week as we were starting to think about this. So I'm sure there's a bunch of others that maybe Matt, who was at that workshop, could speak to, but there is a lot that can be shared, and I think an important part of it is sharing our understanding and sharing our staff talent on this particular.
I would have thought that gravel, not being derogative or anything, but at the moment I just see it as a bit of a talk fest, and I don't see a lot of action coming out of it. I mean, you've been sort of 2 years to this point, and we're no closer to having any.
And so that's an interesting example of one that probably won't be managed as a multi-council five organisation thing, but I would imagine it will continue to be worked on that from an ES and Southland District Council perspective through the gravel working group process.
Some of that gravel needs done now, and we're still talking about it.
Mm.
I mean, what's it going to take, a flood or something, and people get wiped out? And, well, cool, we've got a strategy, but we didn't do anything about it. We're too busy talking.
And I think a big part of this will be identifying, there's all these things that could potentially be considered if we're going to narrow it down and invest our attention, our time, our talent, our money in any one of those things, working out, well, who is the best agency to lead on that, and what support does that agency need to make?
So when are we going to see some action? When's something going to happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. On gravel, I'll have to check back in with the folk who are immersed in the gravel working group. That's not totally across at the moment.
Councillor O'Brien, or did you want to answer that?
I was just thinking of an example, I guess, with gravel, where on the discussion there's nature-based solutions being investigated. Gravel's obviously an issue that needs discussion and sorting out immediately. So in the Dakota catchment, for example, in light of weather climate change, or just the nature of there needs to be some flood management for resilience, the strategy, the phase 1, is essentially breaking down that the river doesn't all of a sudden change its rules because it's entering the Gore District Council. How Southland District Council, whether it's how it approaches gravel, what happens upstream is going to affect a different territorial authorities area. So by having the phase 1 strategy there, that floodplain management needs to be aligned regionally, so it's not one agency doing one thing and the other agency doing the other, because the river, doesn't care about that. So on that particular catchment, that's where there has been examples of nature-based solutions, and whether that then falls into actually informing the ability to come up with an aligned approach to managing gravel can actually now be discussed at a regional level, which I believe is what this phase 1 strategy enables, is like, right, you have to align on that, because there's no point one council making decisions on what it's going to do about gravel, but then another council in the same catchment not being aligned in that same process. So that's just an example of the importance of at least getting aligned first. Then hopefully, I agree, like, these discussions need to happen, and it needs to happen not in silo, agency by agency, and that's hopefully what the phase 1 kind of kickstart.
If I just use the example of Tuarapiri, where the rugby club got flooded this time last year, and now I don't think they can actually get insurance, and it's because a lot of it is a big gravel bar that forces the river straight into the rugby club. Now, you know, they would say they need some action ASAP, otherwise the domain's not going to exist.
Yeah, and I think the gravel management issue, you know, that's an example of, there's a bunch of the actions that we are considering within our climate change action purview, but actually there's a lot of stuff that councils are already doing anyway, and are at different stages of maturity. So there's, you know, a lot of it, we're just making sure that there is visibility across all of the partner agencies, who is doing what stage is it, what needs to be prioritised or elevated in terms of importance. Shared visibility across all of the work that's underway at the different agencies.
I think that gravel's a prime example of not working in silos across and being outcome focused and using all the different stakeholders to drive towards that collective outcome.
But when do we get some action? That's when we sit around here and talk and go on about it. But I mean, 2 years into our term and nothing's changed. So,
Councillor Boatwright?
Yeah, thank you, Phil. And I hate to go on about gravel again, but that is something councils are doing already, aren't they? We don't really need a climate change plan for that. That is something that is part of a business as usual, as it is. I agree that the strategy can help collaborate it across councils, but there's nothing stopping individual councils doing what they are right now, what they have to. We don't necessarily have to wait for this plan to.
No, I think there's a lot of opportunity for people just to crack on and do work. The thing that this might influence is how we collectively view the priorities, and it may shift a priority within an agency based on feedback it's getting from other agencies. That could be one possible outcome.
I just worry, like many of the responses, as you said, referring to gravel management and dredging the rivers and all of that, people expect that to be seen regardless of whether we have a climate. They expect that that's the regional council's job. But I'll leave that. We've talked about gravel enough. I'll talk about the mandate that we speak about here, because I was also part of there, and that's different from what the sense of what I got, both at the Zoom meetings and listening to the recordings later on. I went through the number of submissions there. There is 18 submissions in favor of the plan, and there were 42 against by my count. And again, I am glad you've mentioned they split them between 10 of them being organizations and most of the objections being from individuals. We also need to understand Health New Zealand, Fonterra, they have both been, just picking up two examples out of those, they've both been recipients of multi-million-dollar taxpayer subsidies for net zero. So I would obviously expect them to be in favor of this. That's not to say that you would expect every single farmer who was a shareholder in Fonterra would also be in support of this. And then I look at the last year's climate change perception survey that was done. That's used. That's quoted here. Using that towards the mandate. That was around this time last year, and looking at that one, cost of living was the biggest concern people have over the next 10 years living here. The next one being healthcare. Climate change comes at the third position. At least doing a quick search, a control F on this, shows me at least 11 times where it was said that the sample size is not large enough to draw definite conclusions. Another quote from this one, and I actually jotted it down on page 13 it was, and I'm still referring to last year's Regional Climate Change Perception Survey. It is, bear with me. It is said, while climate change has a high proportion of respondents who rated it as the most critical issue facing Southland, it also had the highest number of respondents who consider it as being the least critical for Southland. So, it's to say we have a mandate, it is, for me, it is a long bow to draw. Yes, there is pros and cons on both sides, but some of the things that I think people have voted in wanting some action done is stuff that the regional councils, such as gravel management and others, would be doing already. But because we've started speaking about that in the terms of the wider climate change, it sort of brings people on this side that, hey, unless I say yes here, this is not going to be done. This is just my impression, but I wanted to highlight this. Thank you.
Thanks, did you want to?
I don't want to go, this isn't a gravel discussion, but it's been used as an example.
Yes.
This strategy is essentially I don't know, like the word mandate was on the workshop, but really it's that the process that's been done, there is a social license from those who took part in the submissions process and this consultation process of a document that doesn't have any action points, it doesn't have any costs associated. It's basically just a let's work together on this one. So if you then apply that, we adopt that approach and put the topic of, say, gravel in front of it, you're right, regional council should be figuring gravel management. However, as a road and control authority, we're one of the biggest users of gravel for infrastructure. So that means that a TA and a regional council need to be aligned on how it approaches gravel. That's what this document would enable, which is what one of the main aspirations of this part of it is just, right, let's put it out there. Can we be more strategic with the climate change lens, and what kind of topics in Southland will that actually help us address? Gravel's possibly one of the best examples to use, because right now TAs use gravel, spend a lot of money obtaining gravel to use the gravel, and the regional council needs to manage how gravel is approached. So both those entities need to be aligned. I don't think whatever anyone's thoughts on climate change are, I don't think they'd contest a approach of work together on it, because this is regionally, we can't work in silo. So that's where the process got to so far, and I agree it's been a little bit longer in my view to get to the point of just saying, right, let's work together on this. What comes out of it's the framework for action, and then insert a topic like gravel and go, right, how do we deal with this? It's if you want to see action, you've got to run with the social license to do collaboratively. It's worth noting that since all of this process, there's even more collaboration to potentially come with whatever the future for Southland is, as far as agencies working together in whatever discussions and topics.
Just before I jump to the other questions, just in terms of process, like this being the workshop, and we've got this item coming up in the agenda for the meeting as well. So I think if we can focus this discussion around questions for clarification from the team, and then we can sort of tailor some of the debate towards the meeting item coming up next. So I've got Councillor Rudenclaw, Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Byers.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you. I was going to talk gravel, but Matt's sort of Richard's spoken about, he's been sitting here 2 years talking about gravel. I've been sitting here 5 years talking about the gravel solution for Southland. So hopefully we're getting somewhere positive going forward. Maybe. But you talked about the community huies. What's your plan around those? Are they going to go out to the district, to their rural base, where?
It's kind of still an emerging opportunity. We're trying to work out what are the resourcing implications of it, when's the best time to do it. We suspect that it's going to have to be the other side of Christmas. It puts us probably into February, March is the appropriate time to consider doing it. So whether we do that on a roadshow basis, or whether we do it as somewhere central and try and bring people to make the best use of the limited opportunity that we've got in terms of time to hold that conversation. So it's still an emerging, and we're happy to take thoughts or feedback on that.
And probably a good time too for a rural base not to be around this time of the year where we're
Definitely.
Quite challenged. The greenhouse gases, the original source of data. What was the original source of data?
So that was from a Great South report, and they've been doing that since 2018, annually updating the Southland profile.
Okay, that's good. I'll just go there. Any thoughts going forward on what cost is for the ratepayer?
We have not dived into that level of analysis, and we know that there's potential for certain initiatives, projects or actions that will carry a cost. Broadly speaking, we see that's one of the main reasons why it makes sense to continue collaborating, so that if there is an opportunity for co-investment, it makes our ratepayers' dollar go the greatest distance possible in response to an investment that may be needed. And of course, we would be taking any major investments or anything that comes from this work, we would expect that to be, in the first instance, probably managed at a council level through the public consultation process, seeking, specific approval or public support for a particular investment.
see, because the ratepayers are struggling now, aren't they? Mortgages, insurance rates. The other thing you talked about was nature-based solutions. Now, Met referred to the flood plains and the flood banks. Was there anything else discussed around there?
Nature-based solutions. A lot of it was centred on flood management, flood mitigation. I'm just trying to think if there was other suggestions. Certainly, Health New Zealand spoke about the health benefits of being more climate attuned to climate needs of housing, for example, and they were very concerned about the equity. That's probably not nature-based, but understanding the connection between health and nature was probably an element that emerged from the submission. Do you think of any others, Rochelle, that were nature-based beyond flood mitigation?
There was a really interesting submission from the researchers from Otago University. I wasn't there, but I have to admit that I can't remember the detail of that. Essentially, some councils are taking an approach of, like Queensland Lakes District Council, sort of pursuing joint biodiversity outcomes alongside mitigation outcomes. And, I think that the submitters who spoke to that topic were primarily focused on achieving those co-benefits through different, evidence-informed approaches.
And things like the university research from Otago, they were saying, for instance, think of our national parks and the carbon sequestration that occurs there. Things like predator control. If you can control predators to a greater degree, the trees and the forests thrive to a greater degree, and so more carbon is sequestered. So they were drawing those connections between, predator control and positive climate outcomes.
So that'd also be things like wetlands, like I know some of the catchment groups are looking at wetlands as natural sponges and those sorts of things to kind of slow the
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another interesting one that emerges for me on the Regional Transport Committee is the bridge replacement challenge for Southland, and understanding as we do analysis of our roading network and understanding where resilience is needed to the greatest degree possible, would that shift our thinking on which bridges might want to be elevated for replacement earlier? Because as you analyse how many extra kilometres may be travelled by vehicles, milk tankers, whatever, burning diesel, then maybe that influences our thinking around, well, actually, we don't want to lose these routes. These are the ones where we need to build resilience.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks, Phil. In terms of, you've got mitigation at one side and adaptation at the other, and to me, they're almost like they're inextricably linked. They kind of have to be. However, adaptation is about undertaking actions to minimise risk, while at the same time trying to maximise those opportunities. And I guess that was sort of, to me, highlighted at a recent workshop that a few of us were at with the Reimagining Matilda, and one of the guest speakers was saying, from a protection perspective and an opportunity perspective, and Southland being a primary producer, it relies heavily on the agricultural sector and the tourism sectors. There are risks, but there are also opportunities, and there are the risks of not doing something based on market forces. In your phase 2 of the working group, do you have the tools or the resources or the ability to be able to use the science that you spoke of earlier in conjunction with being able to form those adaptation tools so that we can run as Southland, protect ourselves as Southland and create those opportunities?
I'd observe that a big piece that's emerged from this work so far is that we have a greater understanding where we have a science deficit or an understanding deficit, and that guides our invest in more understanding and what data, what information will support that. The adaptation mitigation piece, I imagine in my mind is 2 overlapping circles in a Venn diagram, and this is going to be a subset of stuff that sits in the sweet spot where the 2 intersect. And as we invest more in our understanding and identify what are those actions, those initiatives that sit in the sweet spot, it seems to make a lot of sense to me that as a region, that is where we probably want to be prioritising our investment for the future. Stuff that in one hit deals to both positive mitigation outcomes as well as positive adaptation outcomes.
Thank you.
I fully answered your question.
To a degree, yes.
Councillor Byers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Phil. this idea of net zero versus, well, this council's considered an infrastructure council. Part of their remit is to ensure that the infrastructure is appropriate for natural disasters, natural events, where possible. And also there's the need to consider changing climate in dealing with the infrastructure. I'm wondering how net zero, the drive for net zero, will help this council develop more resilient infrastructure.
It's a really good question, and I wouldn't claim that our working group yet has the answers to that question, but it seems to me a very pertinent question to keep at the forefront of our thinking, because it probably speaks to that opportunity to again identify what are the things that we should be prioritising as we think about the work into the future. I would imagine that there will be some obvious insights emerge, but right now I'm sorry, I can't speak to what they might be. Matt or Rochelle, have got any other thoughts on that particular question?
I can't speak on behalf of the working group, but coming out of some of the discussions, like an example of organisational net zero targets of SDC in collaboration with all regional councils or councils in the region commit to setting that goal of net zero 2050, that makes you internally look into what are your processes which could lead to things. I'm going to go back to gravel as the example, but to reduce organisational emissions, cutting down on the cartage of gravel, which we know increases the cost of the load of gravel, if with that lens of also trying to cut down emissions, if that leads to more reason to look into the innovative ways of doing things, because you're not only trying to cut the cost down of delivering that infrastructure, but you're also kind of using the opportunity to also cut down on the emissions, then that is the opportunity to actually get some direction forward. It's bringing another lens into discussions that need sorting out anyway as councils, as an infrastructure council, but doing it with also another perspective of this regional collaborative approach to adapt to climate change and also mitigate, because also the net zero 2050 is something bigger than the region. The presentation here has highlighted that in the submissions there was some sentiment from submitters saying, you know, so what if Southland goes net zero 2050, what does that mean for the globe unless everyone does it? That is something that globally, whether it's driven through markets, through central government legislation, like it's happening bigger than what we can do in Southland. It will affect us and we'll have to adapt to it regardless. If we can align on how we approach it, then it's actually the opportunity just to get on and work through some other issues. And again, you know, using that, how do you deliver infrastructure and roading, for example? Well, if you can deliver roading infrastructure better and more innovatively, because you're also applying this lens of we also need to look at cutting down the emissions on it, being more, you know, if that then affects how do we deal with gravel, then that is one step closer to having a solution, because it's applying, you know, this other goal as well, not just the keeping the cost down, but keeping the cost down. And here's another reason why too, is because we're able to keep emissions and costs down by being more innovative. If that's what it leads to, I'm not saying that is a solution. The working group hasn't got to the point of talking action by action, is that going to solve something? But it's examples of, I guess, yeah, providing that opportunity to align on looking at topics, putting a climate change lens on it and seeing if that actually delivers a better approach of delivering infrastructure, like what councils are to do.
So, just following up there, this net zero then, well, actually Phil talked about a sweet spot. We can, if you come up with some ideas that, well, which this council should be doing anyway, that sort of play to the net zero requirement, which we should also note that a lot of big companies around the world are starting to back away from, Air New Zealand being one of them. But if you can find a sweet spot that plays to that net zero requirement and also resilient infrastructure, then I understand. I think perhaps it will be easier for you to suggest that you have a mandate for that. But Councillor Boper, I think, has touched on, and Chamberlain, I think you'll struggle, or you should struggle, given this debt position that this council is going to be in over the next few years, to introduce actions that solely play to the net zero idea.
And I think a really good example for me is if there was, say, some organisation that had environmental focus and was resistant for you driving trucks across a river to move gravel to a bridge site. But you could demonstrate that if you take an integrated perspective, the greater harm will be done by making it traverse a 40-kilometre route to deliver its gravel. That might give you the justification for a concession to actually just take the shorter route across the river with, for example. To me, that would be something that may be possible in the future that may be opposed at the moment, for example.
And Councillor Graney, did you have your hand up?
Thank you. Thank you, Worship. I'm sort of sitting here listening to the discussions on gravel and actually the transportation of gravel, but I think fundamentally, if I think back, and Margie said we've been talking about this for more than 5 years, I think it's actually having everybody on the same page on how gravel is handled, full stop. And I know there's been differing opinions from the likes of the Yass Fish and Game Council, etc., particularly around places like Newcastle, which is a bridge that, if it goes out, will substantially impact the fueling community. So, my question is, how do you think? And I think Matt might have partially had it. How do you think that the strategy will actually bring the required alignment?
Yeah, I think that started already. As Councillor Tom Campbell mentioned recently, he said he thinks it's actually quite phenomenal that we've made as much progress as we have across the 4 councils in Te Ao Marama to date, and getting to this particular point of the journey. And a big part of what we're doing, I guess I've been inspired a little bit by the Māori perspectives of whanaungatanga. Sometimes it's really important to build relationships that will endure so that you can get the outcomes later on. And I think that's a big part of how we've been working to date with the Climate Change Working Group, is making sure that we're bringing everyone on the journey so that we can continue to have the conversations, knowing that some of those conversations may get more uncomfortable in the future as we start to look at the specifics. So I think it's already started, and I would like to think it continues and we build on it.
Yeah, I've got time. Councillor Rodencourt and then Councillor Duffy, and then we might have to start looking at wrapping it up.
Thank you. My last question, timeframes for the next phase.
Yeah, we considered this in detail at our last working group meeting last week. Our aspiration is to have a draft framework for action ready to talk to the public about in the new year. The idea, we understand that there's going to be a natural lull in activity as we go into the next local government election cycle from about August onwards next year. So really important that we've got a product emerging and can perhaps bring back to consider it at a council level in the new year. Any other comments on that from last week's discussions, Rochelle?
In order to achieve that time frame, really needs to be a focus on our immediate next steps and how we, I guess, transition to the establishment of the new working group following local government elections and kind of what planning preparation we need to do moving into the next LTP cycle. So staff are very aware that there are budgeting constraints and that we need to focus on what is achievable without the need for significant additional resource at this stage. So will be, I would say, relatively simple outline of the immediate priority next steps. And some of those are actually just continuing work streams that have been in progress for some time, and perhaps just highlighting that these are things that local government is already doing that are contributing to a regional climate change response, but sort of bringing that within the principles and the aspirations and the strategy to make sure that we are lining up with that.
Talking new year then. I do think that it would be great to go out into the rural community and to draw the rural farmers into the conversations.
Councillor Duffy.
Yes, just regarding the net zero 2050, which I don't know, time will tell whether it's achievable or not, but do you agree that beyond what that might do for us here in Southland locally, that we do have a responsibility for the planet as a whole and need to think of the role we play in that, given that our New Zealand emissions per head of population are actually some of the highest? So do you believe that we have a wider picture to think about?
I believe that for all of the individuals who are contributing to the work, they may bring a slightly different perspective to that. And I think collectively we've understood that perhaps regardless of your perspective, we know that it's something that we believe our community is calling for in Southland. And that probably speaks to the fact that there is probably an element or a subset of our community who are strong adherents to that view. Some may adhere to it less strongly, some may doubt it or be very sceptical of that perspective. But I think there are organisational moves afoot and commercial moves afoot that kind of push us in that direction naturally, whether you buy into that philosophy or otherwise. Personally, my view is that we are all connected in a globalised world, and we do have obligations to consider not just what happens here in Southland, but other parts of New Zealand, other parts of the Pacific, and across the world globally.
And would you also agree that while we're considering the costs to current ratepayers, that we need to perhaps consider the costs to future generations if we don't take the appropriate actions?
I think that's entirely appropriate to understand that there's an asymmetry between mitigation and adaptation. We adapt for the near future. Perhaps the mitigation is understanding this is something that will make a difference to future generations to a greater degree than perhaps to us. So I think it's entirely appropriate to be considering the intergenerational effects of this.
Just on that, I guess it's the mitigation and adaptation as the two work streams. There's a lot of focus on mitigation, and it's because there is a level of measurability, and that's what those baseline greenhouse gas emissions data is suggesting, is you can read what the emissions are of the region, and then if there's an improvement on decreasing emissions, you can monitor that and see the outcome in the future. But as far as what the effect on the changing climate that has, we won't get to actually observe that in our lifetime. However, the adaptation piece, that's where it is whether it's anthropogenic climate change or a changing climate because of some of the other scientific reasons of the end of a mini ice age and all of these things, it is accepted that we still have to collaboratively adapt to figure out how to manage our flood resilience or save infrastructure like bridges. So we'll be able to see outcomes and measurable outcomes and what action points in adaptation. We'll actually get to see those. The mitigation as far as emissions, we'll be able to measure that we meet net zero 2050, but we won't really get to observe what that means for the world or our piece of the world. However, that part aside, the adaptation piece, that's what the submission, and back to what this part is about, is really focusing on the process of the submissions. That support was in adapting to whatever issues Southland has to deal with and adapt to. The mitigation piece may even just be adapting economically to what a global effort to meet net zero, whatever that's going to then mean to the Southland economy, that's going to need adapting to. So there's the two pieces, like Tom said, are quite inextricably linked, but the just focusing on the emissions part alone isn't any reason to not then actually get on with the adaptation piece, because that it's adapting the things that we need to adapt to now, no matter what the cause or kind of longer term mitigations will be.
I'm conscious of a couple of councillors that haven't had a chance to ask me questions yet before. Is there anyone that hasn't had a chance to speak yet that wants to ask a question? And then I'll hand over to Councillor O'Brien for the final.
Thanks, Rob. Just while we've been sitting here, I've been trying to engage my creative side of my brain with the report. And I'm thinking, we are a Southland-centric, quite unique, so we need to take a regional approach. Absolutely. But once again, if I revolve back to that adaptation and the feeling in the community about how we're going to do this, right? How do we achieve this as Southland, right? And if we look at our sheep and beef farmers, and we look at our dairy farmers, and we look at our primary industries and the ongoing opportunities and risks and issues that we face, if you talk about the science and you talk about mitigation and adaptation, I'll give you an example of something that could potentially work really well. So we now have halter technology for livestock, right? So we can use halter technology, which basically means that we can graze certain areas of land that we probably couldn't graze beforehand, areas that we could graze livestock where it might be more appropriate than planting pine trees. We can, feed management, budgeting, we can keep that stock out of those waterways. I'd like to see collaboration between the likes of a climate working group, regional councils, district councils, central government, and the markets, in order to be able to say, well, we'll adapt and we will change. However, and the market will dictate that. If you keep your livestock, if you do this with your livestock and you utilise feed in this way and you don't plant the whole country out in pine trees, we will then pay you accordingly. The market will then say, well, we will reward you for that. And then we can reward the ratepayer and say, well, you've adopted this, so we'll give you, a bit of a rates relief, for want of a better word, accordingly. See those sorts of discussions happening from a solutions-based perspective, because the general feeling is that we've been here for 2 years, we've talked about it, and the phase 2 is like, let's engage with those organisations where we use that science, we use that technology, and then we put it on the ground, and then we have the validation to be able to go to our markets and say, now you can pay us better for our commodity prices. Are you going to have those conversations?
It's a really interesting topic, because the topic of precision farming and carbon insetting, within a farm business, there's industry entities that are leaning into that. Silver Fern Farms doing some wonderful stuff on that, and I think a big part for us is understanding what are the other organisations doing, what is industry doing. Maybe it's us making sure we don't get in the way of that. Maybe it's understanding what obstacles have we currently inadvertently established. Can we remove those obstacles? And so I think those conversations with those kind of entities are really important. So we definitely need to open up to industry as part of the conversation. It may not be work we do, but at least
it's not our job to do it. You've highlighted that, but we need to allow these innovators and science-driven, results-driven. We can do it. We just have to be allowed to do it. That's all.
And then finally from Councillor Ravenclaw.
One other question. The catchment groups, were they involved in this, Thriving Southland?
We did not directly include them in the working group efforts to date. So no, we haven't.
Just
they didn't submit either, I would observe.
Yeah. Okay, just wondering, going forward, there might be a good way to connect to your rural farmers that are out there doing amazing,
Yep.
The other thing I was going to quickly touch on was the predators, which you've touched on. One of the catchment groups in Southland has done phase 1 of a predator project, and they're heading into phase 2. So could I share that project with you, Michelle? And yeah, okay.
I think that workshop was incredibly valuable, so thank you for taking the time, and thank you to your team for the work that you've done getting it this far, and it's been a very valuable hour of your time.
I would perhaps just close by saying we've really valued the input from all of the councils, including STC, and it's really important and globally, or not regionally influential stakeholders, so really important, and really appreciate the support to date, so thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Really appreciate it.
Some sunshine.
Okay, so
That's good climate change.
we'll now reconvene the meeting, and we'll move on to our first report of the day, which is, not surprisingly, the Regional Climate Change Strategy for Murihiku Southland Phase 1, which is that late item that we approved. This is on page 3, and we've got Michelle also in there to, did you want to talk to this at all?
I ngā rangisira mā, tēnā koutou, i ngā manuhiri, no ngā haue whā, tēnā koutou, no mai haere mai. So through your worship, the Mayor, I acknowledge our councillors and guests and those joining us via the live stream. This report seeks the Southland District Council's adoption of the Regional Climate Change Strategy for Murihiku Southland Phase 1, following changes made by the Regional Climate Change Working Group hearing panel in response to consultation feedback. And that consultation feedback is outlined in the appendices to the Working Group hearing panel report, which is in the attachment to the council report. And I apologise for the incorrect attachment going with the agenda on Friday. And it's just lucky that that was picked up on Monday. So in adopting the strategy, Southland District Council would join Gore, Invercargill and Te Ao Marama, who have considered and adopted the strategy in recent weeks. Environment Southland is expected to adopt the strategy later this month. The journey of the strategy began in February 2023, as some have expressed some time ago. And at that time, leaders representing our Southland councils and Te Pūrunga committed to work together to develop a regional response to climate change. Our leaders acknowledged that the scale of the challenge presented by climate change necessitates a joint effort. Only through collaboration and sharing of resources and expertise will an efficient and effective response be possible. The strategy represents the first of its kind in Southland, intended to unite our local government agencies' efforts to support a cohesive response and safeguard the wellbeing of our community, natural environment and economy from climate change impacts. As you know, the strategy is phase 1 in our regional response. Phase 2 is already underway and will outline the specific actions local government will prioritise in coming years in order to achieve the outcomes outlined in the strategy. As indicated in the strategy document, it will be an iterative approach that will be regularly reviewed, and we will adjust our priorities and actions in response to what is happening in our community and the natural environment. The Phase 2 framework for action will be developed with input from elected representatives, agency staff, mana whenua and the community. Thank you. Through your worship, I invite you to ask any questions. I may respond myself or pass to Councillor Morrison where appropriate, i.e. the questions are very hard.
Thanks, Michelle. And I think just taking on board that workshop that we just had, and I've been thinking about what the definition of success for this is, and like one of the key words that came out, and Councillor Chamberlain referred to a couple of times, is action, and I think that next stage will hopefully focus on action, and I think that tangible action that's going to have benefits for our community, hopefully at no additional cost as well. Like if we can actually incorporate that innovative approach and that would, I guess, save us money rather than actually cost us money from our ratepayers. And I quite like Councillor O'Brien's comment about not getting in the way of that as well, not being a barrier, but actually helping to support and enable that kind of activity. And I think involving our rural community, and especially those catchment groups, will be quite vital going forwards as well. So that's just a bit of a summary from me from listening to that valuable workshop before, but I'll open up the floor for any questions.
I just wanted to make one further comment in relation to what you just said, and you've spoke about the economy. Whatever going forward, Southland around a climate strategy, we need to be running profitable businesses. So we need to be really strategic around what's going to come forward for these, because they're the ones that are paying the wages, the rates, the roading, and supporting all our little towns in this big hub of Invercargill. So I think we need to really be.
Councillor Grady?
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, I think off the back of what Councillor Ravenclaw's just said, you talked in the workshop about engagement and how you might engage. I think the important thing is you said that you didn't quite know what that would look like at the moment. It's really important to go out into the district. So that would be my comment. I know there was thoughts that you might bring people into Wanahui, but my suggestion will be to go out to the people. And that way you'll get the better engagement and better input, certainly from our ratepayers through the district.
Maybe reach out to Richard Kite at Thriving Southland.
Councillor Beaupron?
Thank you. I'm very pleasantly surprised at the phase 2. I'm hoping, because as Matt said, it might just be all about gravel management and just taking a more collaborative approach to that, in which case I would be all in, especially if we have funding neatly tied up together, because as the perceptions survey showed, for people, the biggest concern right now is affordability, cost of living crisis, and there were pretty much equal handful of difference between those very concerned and those not at all concerned. Another concern of mine stems from the fact that ES is among, I believe, the councils that have commissioned NEVA for the climate change scenarios, and a few councils, the ones who used NEVA, have been warned by the Undersecretary for RM Reform, Simon Coate, that NEVA's projections, the scenarios it is using as business as usual, are not based in reality, and they may put exceedingly high costs on developers, and it might make our infrastructure all the more expensive. And then where will we cut costs? Will we make the infrastructure less resilient because we need to meet up to a standard that is not attainable anyhow? And lastly, I'm glad you mentioned that there's a global push, there's an organizational push, sometimes there's a legislative push, and we have to do this legislative push coming from the Net Zero Carbon Act, not so much from the people's mandate. But for me, a whole lot of things still don't make sense. We are currently being pushed through our free trade agreements with Europe. Farmers are finding loopholes that have been there, and now suddenly they are getting caught short that if you don't do this, or suddenly there's some farmers who've got palm kernel being fed that you are in breach. Meanwhile, this current government is looking for a free trade agreement with India, which on 1st April, the Prime Minister heralded that India's last year's coal and lignite production crossed 1 billion tons for the first time. There's just too many dichotomies for me for now, and that's why I'm withholding my judgment here. I also must echo because I see my community boards had submitted, and they have opposed this plan. Thank you.
If we don't have any further questions from the team, I can take us to our recommendations on page 3. Sorry, Councillor Lloyd.
Yep, sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you, Phil, Michelle. Just wondering if, back to that net zero versus resilient infrastructure and the phase 2 and your deliberations, do you have an idea of what sort of percentage of the work is going to apply to or focus on ability to have resilient infrastructure or trying to meet this carbon neutral 2050?
Thank you for the question. In short, no, because the framework for action, is still under development, and also because as we move forward in identifying our priorities for the regional, action, we need to be informed by good quality information and analysis. So that will include, I would think, as one of the first cabs off the rank, and I'm sure Councillor Morrison will chip in and provide a different view if he has one, but a regional climate change risk assessment that examines the various domains and elements, things that we value that could be impacted by climate change. That includes our economy, it includes the impacts to our businesses, in terms of understanding risks posed by climate change. We're not focusing exclusively on exposure to hazards. We're considering the things that have been discussed regarding how expectations of global markets, international commitments can create challenges for our local industries. We're considering how supply chains could be impacted by the transition to a lower carbon economy. And when we consider all these different risks that climate change poses to our region, and assess those risks and grade those risks, then from that will emerge those things that are most urgent, need to be prioritised, and perhaps need that investment up front. I'm sure it will also, as we go through, have to highlight those opportunities to respond to a number of risks with a single sort of initiative or approach, if that makes sense.
So we have no idea how much of this work is going to be focused on versus, and bear in mind this council, I mentioned it before, is an infrastructure council, how much of it's going to be focused on, because that is a requirement in this council, is to manage as best we can natural events and also be mindful of climate change. So this is something we have to do anyway. So I'm just concerned that your work is perhaps going to take us towards this, or it's going to be posing some funding requirements from our community, which I've mentioned is going to be heavily indebted unless some form of change happens. They can't afford to change. So I'm just concerned that
the good point is that
is going to be the driving force.
First of all, it's not our work, it's our work.
Yeah,
Because SDC are a key stakeholder and partner at the table, and have a clear voice equal to any other member at the table. So if that's a concern from SDC, it will certainly be taken into account as we go into the future analysis of what the needs are from a region. I think we are acutely aware that we need to consider a thriving economy along with a thriving environment and a thriving population. And that's the inherent challenge in how we consider our future investments in this whole climate change response space, is how do we understand and make sense of all of those competing tensions. So I'm very clear on hearing that message. I think what's really important to consider is that net zero and efforts are managed very much at an individual agency level. Whether it's SDC, whether it's ES, whether it's Zero, whether it's the jeweller shop down the corner, net zero is very much up to each individual agency to manage. The adaptation piece, and I would put resilient infrastructure into the adaptation piece, that's something for us to manage collectively. And I think that's why we need the collective conversations moving forward to make sure we really understand what's at risk, when, and what's the appropriate level of investment to respond to that.
I think that's our advantage of the aligned approach, is we can put the lens that you're talking about, the exact lens of the importance of our infrastructure, and even things like that ease of doing business and everything as well, in terms of making it easy for our ratepayers to carry on doing what they're doing, and that feeds into that aligned process here, not just focusing on one individual aspect of it, and having everyone in the room will help with that. Did you want to answer that as well, Matt?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to point out that the agencies involved in this, we've actually got a lot at stake, the Southland District. We've got the most widespread part of the region. We've got the most spread out sets of communities that have, we're dealing with waste management, we're dealing with water infrastructure, roading infrastructure to get all around, all of the bridges. The fact that our neighbouring councils have adopted and endorsed the strategy that in the topic of the region's resilience to climate change, we do this collaboratively. It's been identified that there will be some science and data gaps that regionally we're going to have to get to the bottom of here to inform decisions to adapt. The fact that we're not in this alone, if we do this collaboratively, there's a bigger base of ratepayers funding what will be needed in terms of the data required or the planning required to adapt and be resilient as a region. And if I zoom out of the map and think about who's probably the entity to benefit the most out of a collaborative approach, it's ourselves with the regional council, because we've got the most to worry about. We've got the biggest, most complex part of the region. We've got an island, we've got stationary energy sources. We do have a lot of organisational things to address to be a net zero organisation, but as far as adaptation, we've got the most coastline to think about in terms of sea level rise modelling and those things. Taking phase one, moving forward collaboratively, it means that we're not alone as a district council trying to deal with this thing. We're not going to solve climate change as district council. We're not going to solve climate change as the Southland region, but as far as what our obligations, agency by agency, as a local government agency, what things are in our wheelhouse, whether it's waste management, delivering infrastructure, all of those things, adopting this step one of a strategy, which really says, let's do it together, that brings our economy of scale together as far as funding the future data gaps and aligning on decisions so that our neighbouring councils or downstream councils, if they're benefiting from upstream decisions that we make in our district, that's because we are doing it together and we've got actually collectively a bigger ratepayer base to work that with, sharing the resources. That's really, in my objective view of being involved in this process, that's really where we got to. It's well, this is a big complex issue. It's going to have to be dealt with, and we're going to have to do this collaboratively. I agree, we need the framework for action to be the thing that's got some guts and some teeth into it, but we can't get a framework for action unless we can actually get past step one, which is do it collaboratively. I'm happy to move that we adopt phase one of this work, and also in that process we encourage anyone who Tom, you've had some great ideas as far as action points. So this framework for action, be involved, bring ideas to the group. The framework for action will be community whois, there will be bringing stakeholders in. It's not one group going to solve the problem. It's one group just identifying that, well, this needs to be a solution with everyone aligning together on it.
Thanks, Matt. I've got a couple more people wanting to speak, but I'll just see you've moved the motion. I assume you're moving A through to E.
Conversation, I'll take that back.
No, well, I can second it with the conversation carry on. If someone's willing to second it at this stage, and then I've got Councillor Chamberlain and Councillor Ravenclaw that I can still go to before I put it.
I'm happy to move A to E.
bring back to Matthew.
Yep. So, Councillor Chamberlain.
Yeah, look, I'd be happy to support the climate change on the understanding that the group actually focus on what council can do in its own business. I agree with what Matt said, put the climate change over everything that we do. I wouldn't like to see this committee start dabbling and telling farmers what to do. I think that's out of your wheelhouse. So, you know, if I could get the guarantee that the committee is going to be focused on how councils themselves can do a better job, then I'd support it. And I think if we are doing a good job ourselves, then we'll get the support of the public down the track. But then I was, you know, a bit of a warning shot to the top table that as a councils we should be doing this already. You know, I don't think we need to wait for a strategy. You know, it should be part of our thinking as well. So if I could get that assurance that you're not going to dabble, that it's going to be focused on council activity, I'd be happy to support it.
I'm personally, I understand where you're coming from. What I probably can't do is I can't speak for the 5 organisations that will convene to discuss this. But to me, it makes no sense for us to be doing what you've suggested would be harmful of dabbling and telling farmers what to do. I suspect that will be well outside our wheelhouse. I suspect there's going to be enough people in industry and supply chains making those demands for us to be able
I'm only in farming, so I'm talking all organisations, I'm just using farming as an example.
Just to feed back that at the governance group workshop that was held last week, there was a discussion about the different sort of templates that we might work off of in developing our regional framework for action. And the template that was sort of, settled on for the time being, because it's very much, iterative process, things can change direction, but the framework that was settled on as a starting point was the Canterbury Climate Change Partnership Plan, which I can circulate, and that is basically outlines how the different Canterbury councils are going to work, together to respond to climate change, and it is a plan that is focused on local government action rather than sort of describing what the community will do. It is describing what local government will do. So that if you're interested, that Canterbury Partnership Plan may help answer your question in terms of where we're at currently in development of the framework for action.
Yeah, I just think you'll get a lot more response if you can, as Councillor Rodenpool said, if you can save the ratepayers' money. If it's going to be another tax and you just won't get buy-in at all.
Thanks, Councillor Rodenpool.
Thank you. I'll endorse what Councillor Chamberlain's just said, and I was just going to talk about the aligned approach, and we're in this together. Great comments. As a farmer, I sat down recently and went through the budget again and again. And so I'm going to go back to the ratepayer and the dollar. One of the biggest cost rises for the rural farmer are compliance costs. And I'm talking rates, and it's hurting our rural communities. So we need to be very, very careful about cost more coming back. So working together, yes, totally agree with, but these compliance costs are just killing us.
So you're happy to second?
Yes, I'll second it. Thank you.
So if there's no further discussion.
Oh, just sorry, yeah. I don't know, just listening to Matt and Don and Margie and Derek and everyone actually today. I don't know. I just want to sort of reiterate that based on what everyone's talking about, and then going back to the very beginning of the conversation where priorities were mentioned, and Rochelle just said before too. It's a movable feast as well. Things change over time. But the thing that won't change is the sort of talking about what Matt was saying, this and what Don was saying, we're an infrastructure council, but we have a low ratepayer base, we have high liabilities, but we do have opportunities as well. And unless we can actually incentivise our primary industry, our rural industry, into actually adapting or changing, who's going to pay for it? right? Who's going to ultimately pay for it? And when you talk about that prioritisation thing, it's like sometimes the priorities change. We have a neighbouring council that are battling their priorities with regards to their health sector, which affects us as well. So, and you know, when you look at New Zealand Incorporated, as we're in the bottom 10% of infrastructure resilience and at a level which is acceptable under the OECD. We're at the bottom 10% globally. So if you look at that, and then you look at our insurance risks with our infrastructure, and all of the flow-on effects, and it comes back to the person at a grassroots level trying to run their jeweler, or trying to run their dairy farm, like, what are the risks associated in another 1, 5, 10, 15 years' time of having this conversation and we're actually no further ahead? That's my biggest concern, which has sort of been highlighted a little bit here. So from my perspective, I want to see that collaborative approach as a whole, but also, you know, how are we actually engaging the people who are actually paying for it, and how are we incentivising them? And I want to see some real grassroots, hands in the dirt stuff around that. So if we can do that, then I think that's how we're going to pay for it, because I don't know how else we're going to pay for it either. That's all.
It's been done now. If you go to the farm gate, there's a lot going on. Rob talked about wetlands.
Yeah.
You know, well, let's have a
But
look.
you've got to be paid for it. It's all about the same.
Farmers are paying for it now.
The farmers are paying for it, but my point is the farmers need to be
Yes.
for doing that.
Yeah, I
That's that
agree.
incentivisation I'm talking about. And that's that market force saying, well, hey, you know, if I do, instead of fencing my waterway off, I can use science and data and innovation and technology to be able to, with halters as an example, right? It changes the whole landscape. Feed utilisation, as I said before, clean waterways, less nitrogen-based fertilisers, all of those things, you know. It's just can't, we have it, use it, but we as governance and we who have the ability to be able to influence those decisions at a you know, climate change level or a primary industry level, just need to keep the foot on the gas in that respect. Otherwise, we can't pay for it. That's the bottom line. We'll sit here in 5 years' time, our priorities changed because we can't pay for it.
We're talking about Gribble.
Thanks, Councillor. So I've had the motion moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against?
Until we see some more calls here.
And I declare the motion carried, and thank you once again for coming along. And it might be a good time now to break for morning tea. And we're welcome to join us. And come back and welcome back, everyone, and just moving along to our second item on the agenda, which is the Each level of service, which is on page 15 of your agenda. And welcome Roy Hartley to the table to talk to us.
Good morning, Your Worship and councillors. I'll take the report as read, but I'll go through a few of the key highlights. So, yeah, the purpose of the report is to present the potential level of service changes required to pay as a result of the current available budget. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you're all well aware of by now, NZTA has reduced the co-funded overall program from $147 million to $125 million over the 3-year period. That's obviously a shortfall of 22 million, and therefore there's going to be level of service implications over the 3-year period. So one of the proposals, which is the subject matter of this report, is to remove edge lines from all rural roads that have less than 750 vehicles a day. To put that into perspective, currently almost all our rural collector roads, which is our higher volume roads, typically above 200 vehicles a day, are currently marked with edge lines, which is approximately 850 kilometres of network. And under this proposal, that would reduce to approximately 177 kilometres retaining edge lines. As a separate note, our single lane bridges would retain edge lines. So the 750 vehicle a day threshold, that's come out of the traffic control devices rule, which provides the guidance as a minimum specification on providing edge lines where the road is a minimum of 6 metres wide and has greater than 750 vehicles per day. So that's where we've come up with the proposal of we're not actually going beyond national or below national best practice guidelines. So one of the key issues is NZTA has changed the activity classes and the funding work categories which fall within activity classes and put stringent rules on redirecting funds. One of the activity classes known as the local road operations is already overcommitted by approximately $2.5 million through existing contracts and commitments, which is the activity class that pavement markings or traffic service renewals falls within. The expected savings from this level of service reduction would be approximately $400,000 per annum or $1.2 million over the 3-year period, which is again approximately half of the current known shortfall within that particular activity class. I think now's probably a good time to open up to the table for questions.
Thanks, Roy. I think, there was always going to be consequences of that announcement from NZTA about that reduced funding, and they're going to fall in levels of service, and this is one that I don't think it's going to go down well with we're essentially having to take our roading network backwards now to meet that level of funding. Just a question, and it's in terms of sort of looking forward with that type of activity, is there any kind of ability to look at doing some of that work in-house to sort of make some savings as well, given that it's just kind of, it's not the actual building of the roads, but it's actually painting, and having been involved with trying to get the helicopter pad sort of marked, the expense of it was quite high. So do you see any potential savings in looking at doing that kind of work in-house going forward? Might be a hard question.
It's a tricky one to answer. The cost of the plant required is a big one-off investment, and then a specialised operators to run it. And when we went to market about 18 months ago, the current service provider was quite competitive compared to the. So I guess that would give us confidence that what we're doing is value for money. But I can't comment whether, without doing a feasibility study, potentially bring it in-house in the future.
Yeah, but
it's certainly something we couldn't deploy straight away.
I think the other aspect is because of the rules one suppose around deploying it, unless you get an engaged, seasoned operator or an actual person point of view or several, it does take quite a bit of time to become very proficient at doing it. There's a bit of a skill to doing pavement marking. Unlike a brand new road where there's no marking, some of that's automated in terms of computer controlled when the line starts and when it stops. So when actually doing the remarking, that's manual when they press the button to paint and stop, and I'm sure you've your travels around, you would have seen on occasions, not necessarily in our network, but across the country, some lines that aren't always that dead straight, and not that easy to fix.
Yeah.
So it is quite a highly specialised job, I suppose.
So just in terms of those activity classes, would it be easier for you if you didn't have those strict boundaries? Because I know in the past you've been able to sort of cross over where you've got shortfalls and the likes. So would that make this kind of thing easier to manage?
It would definitely give us more flexibility, and in terms of what we're trading off, gives us more flexibility around considering what we could potentially trade off.
So that would be worth in an advocacy piece actually pushing.
100%.
Councillor Duffy.
I was just going to make a point that regarding something like road marking, there'd be a hell of a lot of wet days, the truck would be in the shed while we're paying for it, sort of thing.
That's a written call.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. You talk about the government and the width of the road, and of course we're a rural area down here in Southland. My biggest concern is, the rural roads on a dark night and with our youth and the health and safety around it. Has there been any consideration around potentially health and safety and accidents? The rural roads are one of our contributors of accidents in Southland.
We may have more to comment, but yeah, it is something we've considered. And I suppose there's two elements around the delineation. You have the edge lines and you have edge marker posts. So they both, yes, while the edge lines provide a continuous delineation and the edge marker posts are generally 100 metres apart, they do change when you get to curves. It's not giving up both, so we're being quite cognizant one over the other. And so you could, I suppose that the trade-off again is, do you have one, say, edge lines and you forego your edge marker post, or vice versa? So yeah, we have. In terms of crash trends, initially it may be quite difficult to say, yep, there's definitely a change within a 12-month period, because we do have quite a variability as it sits at the moment between our crash numbers. Some years we'll probably sit around that 18 mark, other years we'll have around 22 the serious or fatal crashes in that vicinity. So it does vary from year to year. The other aspect is that the edge lines won't necessarily disappear overnight across the network. In some places they may still be there to some degree of visibility 12, 24 months later still. But over time they are there for safety, so yes, I suspect there will be some sort of impact.
So the cost of a life versus painting edge of the road, isn't it, really, when you think about that? So I think it will cost us in the future, and it is a really backward step. And I know that you talk about the dollars are funneled into separate areas. Is there any other way we can offset this cost? Is there another business unit somewhere else in this organisation that we can find to ensure that these roads are painted with edgings? I'm just going to throw it out there.
I think there probably is, but that's almost accepting the fact that the money that is generated on the roads from fuel taxes and everything else from that subsidy that we should be getting. And I think we need to, before we do that kind of thing, my personal view is actually push back and then get the funding that's actually generated through the ratepayers paying twice if we are funding it from somewhere else. Then we need to make sure that it's actually used in the first instance, in my opinion. But did you want to say anything else to that?
No, I agree. I mean, ultimately, whether it comes from a different business unit or still the roading, so what you're alluding to there is, can the work be done unsubsidised? And the ratepayer, in essence, paying all of it and not relying on the NZTA share. That's definitely an option, and that's an option for councillors to make that decision. But we aren't, I suppose, to the mayor's point, we're not getting for a base, what I'll term probably a base level of service, in terms of looking after what we have, not building new fancy shiny stuff. That's all that we're asking for from an NZTA subsidy point of view.
That's one of the questions. So if we don't paint those roads, and you say 1 year, 2 year, this decision is just being made now because of the funding around NZTA. So it's like next year we could say, right, we're painting those road edges. Or is this for the next 3 years as in that report?
So from our report point of view is for the next 3, in essence, those edge lines, we'd stop maintaining them going forward. And the implications of that is obviously they will fade away over the next 12 months, 24 months going forward. But from a funding point of view, we've got a shortfall of the next 3 years of $1.2 million for this activity alone. So how do we fund that shortfall in essence? And one option is obviously we top it up with unsubsidised.
But we have budgeted for it in terms of the long-term plans. If we were able to attract the subsidy from NZTA, then we could actually turn it back on.
Absolutely. I think there's a point of note is this is one of the reasons we're putting this proposal forward is it is recoverable from. So some of the other solutions potentially would be a lot harder to recover from should we explore them.
I think,
Very good, yeah, good point.
I think from my point of view, I wouldn't like either of your jobs. And I don't know how you sleep at night when the government throws it back at you, so.
You'd struggle to pay for straight lines, wouldn't you?
Councillor Baper,
Looking at this report, I was trying to understand because you say Downer's costs went up substantially for this one. So is that 400K that we save, is that a net or a gross figure? So there would obviously have been greater savings, but some of them have been consumed by the increase in costs. Is that what you're saying? Or is that the sum total of what, accounting for the increase in costs from Downers for this, plus taking away, what is it, 663Ks lesser painted?
So, so with the contract, we've looked at effectively maintaining our current network of road markings across the board. That's coming at the per unit rate per kilometre of marking. It's different for different activities, but say per kilometre. And we've managed to, over the last 12, 18 months, manage that by being very selective. But with the road marking, you start off with I suppose, a certain base level, and you slowly erode away on that, hence why they don't necessarily always disappear overnight. And we've eaten away on the residual. But with the cut in funding, there isn't enough funding to continue remarking that we need to maintain the level of service.
Are you at liberty to tell us what is the percentage increase in the contractual cost for this particular activity? When you said that.
In terms of what we were paying 8 months ago to
now.
The increase was now.
I'd have to look to be certain. It was fairly substantial at the time.
I was just trying to get a grasp on what sort of figures were we looking at. But I presume you are looking at other councils and benchmarking the costs we are being faced with.
Yeah, and in that time, because we've gone out to the open market, so the open market has determined what the price is. It was the lowest price.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the lowest price we got.
Thank you.
Councillor Chamberlain?
Yeah, I think my question's probably already been covered a bit, but that was my question, that, as councillors, should we be standing up and saying, no cuts to the roading budget? Does that money come from, and there's probably a question for Anne, that's actually funded out of another part of the council organisation, but we still push for funding that can be done later, so that we are maintaining our road network.
Yeah, sorry, you go.
I was just going to, there is a thought about, well, that implies there is money existing in other parts of the organisation, which I would be really reluctant to say that there is. And it's not a small amount anyway, but, Anne could talk to whether, because we have fully funded the program in the LTP, and knowing what it was, which is why you got a modified opinion as well. So whether we could utilise some of it, accepting that you will be paying 100%, not 45% that you normally would, or the ratepayers would be.
And it's not getting, it's almost robbing Peter to pay Paul, but it's not getting a good return on that ratepayers' money that we're, in the long-term plan that we budgeted for, based on a 55% subsidy, 45% subsidy.
My point is, if we save a life by doing the side of the roads, but yet we don't do some work on, the long-term, the district plan or whatever, some work that can probably be deferred, what's the trade-off, I suppose?
Yeah.
Hardly can talk to because we talked about the risks of not marking the road, and what would that mean? Do you want to just elaborate on that, perhaps?
Yeah, so, the obvious risk is the increase in crashes, run-off road crashes, particularly in variable weather conditions. Obviously, not every crash necessarily results in a fatality, but that risk exists that we will see an increase in serious or fatal crashes occurring as a result of not having the amount of roads marked that we do have.
I think.
So, just in terms of, I suppose, the budget question, as Vibhuti has highlighted, because of the long-term plan and what we applied for, and therefore the council's proportion of the money, it is there. It's just, but it goes back to, we can use the roading budget, council's share that has been rated for, to fund the gap, but it's 100% funding, and I suppose moving away from council's stance of not doing unsubsidised roads, NZTA funding is available.
I think given as well that, as Roy's touched on, that this isn't going to be, it's not going to, we make the decision today and tomorrow all the roads are not marked anymore. That gives us time, and I'm meeting with Hartley tomorrow to discuss kind of how we approach this with the government from an advocacy point of view. Like, it still gives us time to get that money back in, and we can address this sort of over time depending on how that goes. I think in the first instance that pressure needs to be applied to NZTA for...
These guys are wanting a decision today on whether that goes forward, and I would say strongly oppose that they do cuts.
But what I'm saying is that if we can get that funding back in, we can turn it back on, and we can make a decision to then go and do it, and we can actually do it next year. Councillor Keast.
Thank you, Worship. I'm very concerned about this because I think I've a number of times appreciated that the white line is there on the side of the road to actually, when we've got oncoming traffic towards you and it's adverse conditions, that you're sticking on that, you haven't gone off. My question would, well, a few things that I would like to see in that is what the map that shows where I think it's on page showing the roads that currently have the edge lines on them. I would have liked to have seen that in a graduated thing to show the in a different colour where the lesser road user numbers were, so that it fades out to something else, starts off it. Because red sort of indicates to me that, yeah, we definitely need, well, red it would be, yes, we definitely need it at 700, more than 750 cars a day. Whereas if it, because I note on here that it would appear that unless they're NZTA roads, but a lot of the Southern Scenic Route isn't marked by taking that out, and I feel that that is a bit of a backward step for the safety of people, drivers, a lot of drivers that aren't used to our road conditions. So I don't know whether, yeah, I am very concerned about this cutback because I think that we're going to have to spend money elsewhere on making sure that the edge breakers, or the edges of the roads are safer for people to drive along them or off them a little bit, because you do not have the road markers right there, so it needs to be a good safe driving platform too close to that anyway. You know, you're off the edge of the road, but yeah, so there's going to be trade-offs in this, and the biggest one will be the loss of life, or or just even one crash, because if you have a crash, you know how much it costs you. Just a minor injury and some damage to your car is actually a lot of time for an individual, you know, that it's going to quickly mount up. We will never see it, but again, it's our ratepayers. So I was thinking before about the suggestion of taking it from elsewhere in a budget. Well, to me, that's like them paying it the ratepayers paying 3 times. They're paying it for, supposedly, for doing that work over there, but no, we've charged them for doing this work here. So that's 1, 2, and then they're paying through the roads, it's 3. That the 4th way will be the personal cost. So not sure whether we need to put in a recommendation somewhere that it isn't, this is only subject to not being able to secure the funding from NC or from some other source to be able to turn it back on again, because it seems feels a little bit too permanent, and I'm not happy about really accepting the risk that we're putting our communities in.
And I think as well, just reflecting on when you were talking driving in fog, which we get quite often, you quite often do rely on that line because you haven't got the street lighting on the rural roads as well. So that's another thing to. I've got Councillor Graney and then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Worship. Before we were talking about advocacy, to government, I just wonder then if there's, if it makes sense to put in a further recommendation around the advocacy piece back to government, so that it is noted that there's reluctance around this, assuming that we approve that, and that continues, and that it can be revisited, and then it's actually overtly stated that the advocacy will continue.
Yeah, well, I was going to actually suggest, based on the discussion that we had, we could change D to actually say that we don't approve the proposal and we push back to government and see what the implications are on the team of actually putting that kind of a message on there, because I think we need to send a strong message here that this is unacceptable. And the team are doing what they can do within the limited realms that they've got, but I think we need to send that message loud and clear that this is an unacceptable decrease on level of service, especially when the government's pushing on focusing on the basics, and this is the basics that will have an impact on people's lives. Sorry, were you finished? I interrupted you.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry. Councillor Wilson?
Thanks. I've had a bit of a flashback to being 15 or something, or whenever it was, the defensive drive course before getting my restricted, and I've had a lot of advice in my life, and I choose to ignore a lot of it, but I remember the one thing of when you're driving on a road and there's headlights coming towards you, you look to the side of the road and use that sideline to take the corner. Like it's kind of defensive driving safety 101, that's what those lines are there for. So just on that basis alone, the idea of dropping that level of service for the commercial drivers driving through our district, the community, the residents driving through, tourists driving through, I think the level of service needs to remain, and the problem of the funding gap absolutely needs to be advocated at a central government level. When I look at the map though too, there's also these roads will be utilised by the ratepayers of neighbouring councils. This decision, because it's within our road and control authority little jurisdiction, it ultimately will affect those other users who aren't our ratepayers. But as far as going forward with advocacy, that's where highlighting this issue to ICC, to Gore, even to over into the Otago areas of this decision that we're going to have to grapple with is ultimately going to affect you people as well, because you use these roads, you drive these roads. If tourism, that's such an important part to all of the area, all of the different TAs and regional areas, that you've got to keep that level of service for them as well. So if we're going to go forward and advocate in the hopes that NZTA will actually bridge that funding gap and have it come back to the district, well, it needs to be a bigger voice than just the district, because I'm sure internally within Gore and in Invercargill, they've probably got their own funding gaps of, we didn't get what we asked for either. But if we're going to highlight that this drop of level of service is going to be a safety issue, and that's going to affect people beyond just the people within our districts, the nature of roads. So I'd encourage that approach for advocacy, but make it a wider voice, and whether that happens at a Southland Otago regional transport conversation, maybe that's the push to get Southland a little bit more looked at in that Southland Otago mix. Because you look at this map in attachment A, you go, well, plenty of either private vehicle users or commercial vehicle users or tourism vehicle users that help stimulate, say, the Invercargill economic area, require that network of roads that is within our district, but it doesn't make it just our problem.
There's a whole lot of shirts banding around Dunedin at the moment that says "They Save, We Pay," and it's a very similar. In fact, it's exactly the same. It's cuts being made at the government level through income that's generated through. I mean, the hospital one is income tax, but this one is through road excise tax that is actually targeted at the roads that the cars are driving on, and we need to ensure that that money is coming back to Southland, because but that thought of taking it out of another budget, we've just gone through that long-term plan where we've stretched everything out as far as we can, and we simply don't have the money from somewhere else to pull, and it definitely needs to be coming from that, and I totally agree with everything you've said there, Matt.
The question I have would be, I don't know, but at ICC or Gore, are there conversations going on there about having to drop their level of service in their town or city area? They might have, other, so they're also short forward and having discussions of what level of service they're dropping.
Gore are 3 million short, and they've had a similar conversation. I watched that council meeting, so, and I totally agree with your approach of going back to our previous item of actually doing this together as well in terms of that advocacy piece, because it affects all of us. I mean, our bar rate is at the bottom end in the country as well, so any of these cuts affect us a whole lot more than a lot of the other councils. Those that are in the 60s and the 70% don't get so much of an impact, but we certainly do feel the pain. Councillor Fraser and Councillor Rutherford.
I was just thinking in terms of the advocacy, there's also the increased cost on the health budget if there's more accidents, and the likelihood that we won't have hospitals. And it's part of the equation that we're simply putting more pressure on an already pressured system, and so that's another point to kind of raise that, the short-sightedness of robbing, and it's not an understatement, robbing from Southland to pay for somewhere else on roading is costing lives, and then that goes into the postcode lottery for hospitals as well. And so basically, once again, Southland gets screwed by.
And I don't think you can actually put they have put a cost on a life, which I find quite odd, but it would be a hang of a lot more than the savings that are made, just on a single life. So, totally.
$10 million, isn't it?
Councillor Runcorn.
Thank you. I just look at us at the bottom end of New Zealand with the top performers, to be fair. So I just cannot take the risk to endorse that. I would like to change D, as Rob spoke to before, that we don't approve it. And there's too much health and safety on a dark, gloomy night in Southland. There is nothing worse than driving on some of those rural roads with a big truck coming towards you with their lights on. I just agree with what Councillor Wilson said, and I cannot change the level of service. I've seen too many accidents happen and deaths over my time in central Southland and the losses that we've had. So no.
Councillor Green.
Thank you, Worship. I'm just supporting that and supporting what Councillor Wilson said. Maybe we take it to mayoral forum and you take it to mayoral forum, and then also through to as a TA and that further
I think
discussion, so that I think it would be helpful for this council to understand where the compromises are in some of the other councils, just know whether we are on the same page, accepting that we are different, particularly from ICC and our structure. And the other question I had was, I'm guessing the reports come to us because it's spring, and now we're in road painting season. But how time critical do you see it in terms of deferring a decision?
The contractors are awaiting a decision today.
Oh, right.
Because in terms of the mayoral forum, I think and Matt touched on it, the Regional Land Transport Committee is probably the better one, and we've got Minister Brown coming down at the end of this month, and so I'm catching up with Hartley tomorrow in terms of basically hitting him between the eyes on the cost of what this is actually going to do. So working really hard on that plan. I did that slideshow for Minister Ducey a couple of months ago and enhancing that, and there's no frilly stuff here at all, and we need to get that message out loud and clear and get that understanding of what Southland roads actually are, and even some of the examples that we've heard today can feature into that piece.
So, thank you. Going back to the contractors waiting for a decision, I'm assuming that they could still start on places that are ones that we will do, rather than ones that we are proposing potentially not to do. So they could still start something as opposed to start nothing.
In theory, yes. In practice, I suppose the challenge is that if you're driving past the road to get to the next road, there's quite a lot of cost involved from a fuel consumption, etc., as opposed to the actual paint component.
Yeah.
And that's, I suppose, what makes it tricky and why, that cost efficiency. And so they've in terms of the costs we pay, that's all factored into how efficient we get around the network. So it still is a degree of how effective or cost effective they can actually get around the network. I suppose opportunity, just further to, I suppose, the question around the contractors, I suppose that's the key element for us. We are going into the spring, summer season when a lot of activity does take place. And so postponing, we're in that position where we don't have effectively because we don't have the NZTA share, we don't have the budget to do some of our work. So we need to have an understanding of, I suppose, the options are we drop something else off the list. Some of those things that can be more immediate, like your ice gridding. Hopefully most of the colder weather's passed, and that's maybe a problem for next year in terms of April, May, June, or whenever the colder weather arrives. Versus or doing the unsubsidised component and utilising what SDC's share of the LTP budget is from a roading point of view and doing the work unsubsidised. But for us, we need some, well, in principle, yes, we don't agree with it and we'd love to do it, but from practical getting on and doing something or not doing something, we need some direction on that because the contractors are waiting and either we do it or we don't do it, or we fund it or we don't fund it. It's probably the reality for us from at least at a staffing and contractor level.
Because I'm just thinking in terms of, and I mean, I've written a few notes here. Right at the start, I had, do we leave this on the table? But that answer that the contractor needs to know tomorrow kind of doesn't leave that one to make your job harder. Delaying it for a year, which is another one that I thought, how does that one kind of sit in terms of getting kind of almost the best of both worlds, allowing the time for the advocacy to kick in and get a result without degrading the road too much? Because like you said at the start, it's something that you paint them next year and they're not going to degrade hopefully too much.
Yes, so I agree with, I suppose, rather than making the decision as to, I can't remember who raised it, but it's almost like a final decision and we're never going to put the edge lines back or maintain them as to, or let's revisit it in 12 months' time. But in saying that, there will, depending on the type of road and the type of traffic, some roads, the markings will look better or I shouldn't say look better, but there will still be some residual markings in 12 months' time, and there will be other roads or portions of roads where there will not be any markings left in 12 months' time. So it's going to be a mixed result across the network. I can tell you it'll be Road A or this section of Road A. Time will tell, unfortunately.
And the ability to almost get reactive and do an RFX on one that suddenly got really bad and head out there, it's probably an expensive way to kind of work. Just conscious of a few councillors waiting, so I've got Councillor Beauperoy, Councillor Fraser and Radenclaw.
Thank you, Rob. Most of them the questions have been asked. I guess at the risk of repeating myself and others, we are fourth in terms of GDP per person. We have far rates that are, if you compare them to the other three before us, the populations are nowhere in comparison. We also do 12% of this country's pastoral exports. This is going to have a longer term ramification. Thank you.
I suspect you won't have the answer for this. If we were to use our funding that we've got in the LTP and do unsubsidised work, what level would that take it down to, like roads of up to 500 people a day, or is there a way we can work out, obviously would reduce the damage or the risk? Does the question make sense? If we used our funding without subsidy, how far down the number of road users could we get?
In terms of our funding, because we've got funding, SDC's share of the funding is across a range of activities. Where we choose to fund it, the SDC portion, we're not bound by the NZTA rules as such. So if we had budgeted, I'll pick on our pavement rehabilitation budget, we didn't get all the money for that. So our share, our residual share of that could be shifted into pavement marking, and you could still do all of the roads if you wanted to do that.
But if we didn't move any other budget, if we just used what we'd allocated,
45% of.
we used the 45%, you know, would that take us down to we're doing all the roads up to 250 users a day, or, you know, we couldn't do them all still, but at what level do we get down to?
Is that in terms of what we've allocated for traffic services as an activity, or
just with this pavement marking?
Well, I guess you could also look at how much of the cost involved is the paint and how much is the travel to get to the area, because if the network is 5,000 kilometres, to get out to a wider part of that part needed done, and not doing the part in between on a shorter budget. Is that kind of what you am I understanding?
Yeah, it was just kind of, if we did spend what we were going to spend on it, obviously we would get more done than if we don't do anything. So where does that bring the line? At the moment we bring the line at 750. Where would it bring the line down to? And as I said, I don't expect you to have an answer now, but
no, not off the top of it. I understand now what you're going for. So say if the original budget was making the number up now, $2 million, NZTA approved $1 million, but because we've actually got another $500,000 from simplistic for the SDC share, how far will that $500,000 get us? No, we haven't done that exercise.
So what I'm, sorry, Councillor Rodencourt.
No, probably, tongue in cheek, I'm looking forward to the summer season. There's many people around this table will be. Bit of sunshine. Mine was really about if we left it for 1 year. But the question around that 750 vehicles on a road for Southland and some of those little rural connector roads, what's the theory behind that? So the government, that's the government guidelines around TA.
So those guidelines are generally, whether it's these or others, it's generally best practice, and research that's been done both nationally and internationally, seeing where the risks are, what measures you put in place to address those risks, whether that's pavement marking or road signs, or it draws on a whole range of research and learnings, I suppose, to come up with those guidelines.
So looking at the recommendations here, and would you be comfortable if we delayed D for a year and put that year time frame on here? Does that, I guess I'm asking the table as well, is there a level of comfort for delaying this decision for a year, putting in an E in there that the Mayor takes us straight to the Minister, because I think going through Mayoral Forum and everything is too slow, so go straight to the Minister, but CC in the Mayoral Forum, the Regional Land Transport Committee, and everything as well, to highlight what this is impacting on us. And I mean, this is something I can take to the Minister when he's down on the 25th, as the consequences of what this has done. But yeah, getting back to that year delay, is that doable enough with your work?
So to be clear, a year delay in the decision, so we would be marking the edge lines for another year?
So it won't be, or
we would be marking?
Would not.
That's what he's saying, though. Would be a 1 year pause, or are we?
Saying, are we?
Yeah, it's, do we pause the decision, or do we pause the road marking, Councillor Green?
Just to clarify, NZTA, there's no further decision that we're expecting from NZTA.
So yeah, if we continue with the road marking for a year, that leaves you, and for whatever reason we don't, and I don't even want to think in this way, but we've got to be potentially realistic. If we don't get the subsidy, we're going to lose that $400,000 worth of savings.
Exactly. So you'll be $2.9 million conversation in a year's time.
So it's a $400,000 gamble on E. if we continue for a year, or we can delay for a year, noting that the lines aren't going to disappear in a year, and when we get this funding across the line from NZTA, we can do the whole lot. Councillor Chamberlain?
Are we better not to be doing footpaths, putting that money into road marking in the hope that we get money back from NZTA to...
Well, we're not really doing footpaths anyway, that's been cut.
Yeah, we're taking some,
There's another one
taking it from another part of the budget, because I just don't feel comfortable about not doing
So
that.
which part of the budget?
Well, I don't know, I'm asking these guys.
Yeah, so we detailed in the report where it could potentially come from.
You were saying, yeah, well...
It's basically bridge maintenance, structures component replacement, traffic services renewals, grim.
Well, I'm just thinking on the lines of saving the money for a year and then having some faith that after that period, we've got a strong argument for...
We need to play this council meeting as well, because, yeah.
I have a feeling we got on better when it was Waka Kotahi, actually.
So, like, is that a line that everyone's kind of comfortable with?
Can I ask one other question? You talked about some of those road marking, or the road mark will disappear within this year.
But we're not going to get perfect.
I think the year of advocacy piece.
Only not so much the advocacy piece, but when you decide on anything, you will need to decide for a year at least. I don't think you could go, we won't do it for 6 months and we'll review, because the contractors only go out in certain seasons. That's the other part of it.
Right, so this is when next year, because otherwise when we were listening to the regional climate change working group, they were talking of, post-August, there's a lull and anything needs to be done or a decision needs to be taken. So contractors might go later, but should we be revisiting this decision sooner? I guess that's my question.
You can revisit it sooner, but you'll still be revisiting.
The contractors would still be,
within this financial year. And I think Councillor Fraser's comment around impacts on the health surface are actually, they're a significant part of it. There's constantly ACC data coming out on the cost of accidents, and there's direct and indirect costs. I mean, the ACC is only just a part of the cost of an accident when you actually look at the pressure it puts on the health system. So I think that element of it really does need to be pushed just as much as the far rates and aspect of it does.
So just another question, just to try, I'm trying not to complicate this further, but 25th of this month, meet the Minister, it's successful, he goes back to Waka Kotahi, they increase our funding. Can you then go to the contractor and start in November and say, hey, look, can you fire things up and actually do this year? Or is that out of the question? Probably a hard one to answer. And you won't be able to answer, I know, but do you think that would be difficult for the contractor?
I think they could deliver some, but not the full program, would be the reality.
So they could focus on some of those ones that would be impacted in terms of...
As we touched on earlier, the areas that they haven't been to yet and still driving past, they can probably pick up those areas.
It's just managing the practice for them. I mean, we don't necessarily know what their full commitments are because they do travel around, whether they go to the West Coast or Central Otago. The kit that's here doesn't just live permanently in Southland. And I suppose that's what makes it a little bit difficult to say, yep, they can or they can't. The ability to have I suppose further to Roy's point, the ability to have the conversation with them and, okay, you are down or you're potentially they've picked up a contract or they've lost a contract somewhere else and it gives them capacity. There's all these factors need to be taken into consideration.
We've gone such a big amount. We've gone from 850 case to 177. That's a huge drop there, and I would think the contractors would look at something else to pick up that slack in their work stream.
So trying to get us to the decision, which is my job. Are we comfortable with delaying the work for a year while we get towards getting that money that we should be getting is that, I mean, comfortable is probably not the right word.
Yeah, so comfort in it.
Accepting that if there was a change, if we were successful, that we didn't have to continue that delay.
And I mean, I'm not going to wait till the 25th of October to talk to the Minister either. Like, I'm going to write a letter today highlighting that. So if we put an E in there that we request that Mayor Scott takes the issue direct to the Minister of Transport and linking in the Southland Regional Transport Committee and the Mayoral Forum expressing concern over the decision to reduce the funding from Wakukatahi.
Could you link the councillors into that as well?
Yeah.
Just add for 1 year.
Yeah, and at the end of D, just add for a year.
24-25 year.
So we have to, well, thanks. I know this has been a very, it was never going to be an easy decision. And yeah, I accept that it's difficult for you guys on the ground as well, trying to actually find money out of nowhere to do the riding program that we agreed to in the long-term plan. This was always going to be the risk of that. So we've got A through to D there with the revision of for the year, and we've got the new E, which I don't know if it's behind me yet. Does anyone want me to repeat the E, or are we comfortable with what I said before?
Comfortable.
Cool. Is someone happy to move? Councillor Graney, seconded by Councillor Bowden. There's no further discussion. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? That is carried.
Sorry, I just wonder, and this is probably silly and it certainly wouldn't help emissions, but could we save any money perhaps on traffic management for some of our road projects by closing the road and diverting people where there's a suitable detour?
Question for the, can you have an answer to that?
Yes, that's an option. It still doesn't necessarily. Again, the big issue in terms of the discussion we've just had is how the funding's allocated and the ability to move funds between, dare I say, buckets. And that's the issue. There's one for road marking, closing the road and putting a detour in place to make a savings to get more efficient. They're already driving down the road and it's sort of semi-static. So
yeah, I was thinking more of reseals and stuff.
In terms of, it is a good question. In terms of our more construction-related activity, yes, there is but you've got to then consider the impacts of diverting that traffic onto the other roads. Where you generate on the other roads, and that cost may be higher than the cost of the traffic management. So there's a bit of an economics piece on a case-by-case basis. Length of detour, so cost to travel, yes, it might save us, but I suppose the economic cost is sort of spoken about today already for the extra travel distance, etc. They're all factoring into it.
Thanks, team. Right, sticking to the theme of roading, our next item 7.3 is the riding bylaw on Stewart Island Rakiura. So it's the parking and one-way participation, page 21.
Good morning, Your Worship and Councillors. The purpose of this report today is to present the draft roading bylaw revision 3 2024 for your endorsement for consultation. If adopted, the draft bylaw would revise the current bylaw with amendments focused on restrictions which apply on Stewart Island Rakiura. The draft bylaw has been prepared for the remedy of two issues on the island sought for prioritisation by members of the Stewart Island Rakiura Community Board. The proposal relates to updating and expanding car parking restrictions to address evolving parking needs on the island and a new one-way system to enhance safety of road users on roads approaching Observation Rock. Although there are a large number of specific restrictions proposed, these amendments are considered minor in the wider context of the bylaw and its application throughout Southland District. If Council chooses to endorse the draft bylaw and release it for consultation, staff will undertake a consultation process in accordance with Section 82 of the Local Government Act, running from 10 October to 10 November. Councillors will note that staff have extended the consultation period presented in the report from meeting on Friday 8 November to Sunday 10 November. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Chris. And I'll just look over at Councillor Spraggins' way if he wants to add anything before we open up the floor.
No, it was just so great to actually get to this point after how many years, Hartley? we've been trying to do this for years and years and years, in particular the one-way street. And you people saw it when you were on the island when we went on the bus up to Observation Rock area. And that officially at the moment is you might be able to pass a bus and a truck on there. And the parking one's just been highlighted in more recent time with the answers that we were given is that ask the people not to do it, which is all very well. You can ask them not to do it, but they'll still do it. And there are vehicles being left there, like at Christmas time, there were 2 contractors that left their van outside the airline office for 6 weeks in prime parking spots. And it happens all the time. And so what's aimed here is just to alleviate it. For the number of people on the island, there are far too many vehicles. We can't solve that. The idea was that perhaps we should put in more parking areas in the green areas, and we've refused to. We've done that with a couple of areas, but we're more interested in those that are off the island for longer than 12 hours. Use the shuttle to get down to the ferry or to the airline office, or take your vehicle home or park it in one of the outer areas yourself.
I think it's good that the police have offered to do the enforcement, so there's no extra cost for us, because that would be a challenging space over there, so that's a useful. Any questions from the floor? Didn't think there would be too much discussion on this one. Would you like to move that, Councillor Sprague?
I'd love to.
So we've got recommendations A through to H on here, which, if everyone's comfortable, I won't read out. I'll take them as read, but Fiona,
G has to change.
G is going to change. Sorry, to Sunday the 10th of November.
Sunday 10, yeah. 10 November.
Hang on. Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah, 10th of October, 10th of November. So noting that change in G, you still happy to move that, Councillor Sprague? Yeah. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Chamberlain? There's no further discussion. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anybody against? That is carried. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Right, going to try and catch up a bit of time now. 7.4, the appointment of the Deputy Chairperson of the Insurance Committee. This is absent, so I will hand over to Vibhuti to my left. This is on page 117 of your agenda.
Specific, so it's a...
Sorry, can we just focus on the item, please? Sorry. Move, oh, sorry.
No, there you go.
Is everyone happy to move right along with that one? Moved by Councillor Fraser, seconded by Councillor Wilson. Is there any discussion on this? No questions? Too easy. I'll declare that carried. Thank you, team. This is clawing us back some good time, thank you. 7.5, amending of standing orders, members attending remotely counting towards the quorum, which will be happening in about an hour's time. Kind of speaks to the value of this one. This is on page 119 of your agenda, and welcome, Mikkel. And just noting that we need 75% majority to pass these recommendations.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Councillors. The purpose of this report is to update the standing orders so that members attending remotely can count towards quorum. So legislation provided for temporary arrangements to allow members to count towards quorum when attending remotely. This temporary legislation has been repealed, so from 1 October yesterday, members attending remotely only count as quorum if the standing orders provide for that. Council's current standing orders do not allow for remote attending members to count to quorum. So enable that to be able to happen in the future, so from, once this is assumedly voted on today, standing orders need to be updated. So the recommendations on page 120 are for Council to adopt an updated version of standing orders that have had 4 amendments made to them to allow for the remote attending members to count as quorum. These amended standing orders, if adopted, will apply to meetings of Council and Council's committees and subcommittees. I should highlight, though, that community boards operate under separate standing orders, and since it's not common practice for members of community boards to attend remotely, We will be looking at updating the standing orders for community boards at the next triennium, just when they re-adopt them at the beginning of the triennium. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Michael. And I was just reflecting on this one. The prime example was last triennium where we had to have a council meeting for one item, and the cost of getting everyone into town in time and money is quite high. So being able to even do something like that, so there is a clear need for it potentially every now and then, but I think it's valuable to have that in. Councillor Keast.
Thank you, Worship. So just to query, would this then apply to subcommittees of council as well?
Any further questions? Councillor Graney.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you for your comment on community boards. Personally, and I know it is a side issue to this, and I'm supportive of this. I would like to see it apply to community boards. I think the nature of community boards is changing, and that it would, and that there are greater requests from the public for being able to have a look at that, see those meetings online. And so therefore would like to see at some point that standing community boards be changed too.
I could perhaps clarify this. Standing orders do allow for community board members to attend remotely. So they can attend remotely, they just wouldn't count towards the quorum, which is 4.
Yeah. But I would like to see it to take into that next level.
So would you be comfortable, Councillor, with it going on to the next triennium standing orders, or would you like to see it happen before then?
I'm comfortable with it, with not creating any extra work right now.
Is there a staff smiling at that one? Cool. There's no Councillor Duffy.
Sorry, so don't contribute to the quorum. Is there a vote valid? Yeah, okay, thanks.
There's no further discussion. We've got our recommendations there, A through to E, which for time's sake I won't read out unless anyone wants me to. Happy to move, Councillor Graney, seconded by Councillor Rutherford. Noting that we need 75% to pass, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anybody against? 100%. Carried. Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Right, item 7.6, annual alcohol report to Alcohol Regulatory and Licensing Authority. Another acronym, ALA. I'll welcome Betty up to the table to speak to this one.
Tēnā koutou katoa, tēnā koe te rangatira, tēnā koutou te kaunihira. Kia ora, Worship, councillors and those gathered here. The purpose of my report is to inform you of the annual alcohol licence requirements under the Sale and Service of Alcohol Act, ALA. The findings include the financial report from the last financial year, the online survey, and current list of club licences as of June 2024. Thank you, and I'll take the report as read. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer.
And I guess it's an opportune time to acknowledge the work of the committee and Councillor Duffy for all the time that he puts into this work. It's quite a workload there, and so thank you, Paul. And is there anything you wanted to say to Paul before I open up the question?
No, I just think it brings to our attention the great work done by the staff, and on top of those licences that are mentioned there, there's a whole raft of specials that go on through the year, and some of them have their short notice problems, etc. But the staff certainly put themselves out to deliver great service.
Any further questions? Or? Yeah, I think this is a pretty straightforward one, and once again, just acknowledging that work. It's stuff that happens behind the scenes, and not a lot of people notice it, but I think the ease of doing business comes through loud and clear, and I've only ever heard compliments from that side of it, so yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, Matt.
I don't know if it's appropriate in this report, but it's on my mind as the concept of the potential of reorganisation of local government. Has it been considered the difference of how our licensing committee works versus licensing trust? Like, I'm just highlighting that that's obviously a conversation that's going to need to flow into that proposal. So some of this type of data will be really relative for that conversation going forward, because those, Gore, for example, has the Mataura Licensing Trust, so 2 different ways of operating. So we are going to have to take some of these reports and ways of doing things to also understand if there's going to be a shift in the way local government works, how this is going to work along with those other entities. Just want to highlight it while the discussion's there.
That we've got 3 material licensing trust establishments in our area now, and they're no different to anyone else.
So we've got the recommendation there that we'll receive the report, and I'll move that from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor O'Brien. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody against? That is carried. Thank you very much, Betty.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Right, I wanted to get the management report done before lunch, and we're looking like we're going to be right on time. So the management report, and I'm going to look to my left to speak to this great report.
Thank you, Worship. Look, all I want to acknowledge is the long-term plan adoption, and what that means is the start of a whole lot of more work. So everyone has been busy trying to implement all the work streams in there, and you'll see through the operational work what all has been happening. But yeah, I don't have anything further to add. I'm happy to take any questions.
Cool. Are there any questions? Well, I'll move through to the A3 separately, but up until that point, are there any questions for the Betty on the report? There being none, I'll just move over to our A3. Up in this role. So I've got the Building Solutions team. Did Adrian want to?
Oh, sorry. I thought my building manager was here. Apologies. I need to more open on it. Right. We don't just sit there gazed into the stars, you see. That's the problem. And you've been far too efficient today, sir. That's the problem. Yeah. What I can tell you with the building team before I read the A3 is that we've had a slight downturn in the amount of consents that we are getting out the door within the 20 working days. We've gone down to approximately 85%, and we've put a bit more concentration on to the clearance of code compliance certificates because that was suffering, and we've moved that up from the sort of mid-60s up to 91%. But the reason we've gone down, we've lost one staff member to a neighbouring council, and we've had one staff member who was seriously sick and hospitalised for a couple of weeks. So we run pretty lean. So we just didn't have the ability to get support in to cover those deficits. I am happy to report, however, that we've just done a round of recruitment, and we have our 2 vacancies. Hopefully we have suitable people to fill those vacancies, at least one of which is already qualified to carry out building inspections. Now, that's the first time in at least 5 years we've actually recruited somebody who's qualified. So that's a real op for us. I think it's an op practically, but it's also an op for us that we're able to attract such talent, because I think that's been a problem for us in the past. So the reputation of the team is very, very good. I'm sorry, I'm desperately looking for this A3.
171.
171, sorry. We have a new building manager starting on the 15th of October as well, which will support us very ably in that role, although I must say that Joe Anderson has done a fantastic job as acting manager. But we've got somebody coming in who has the technical background as well, which will support the team even better, we believe, and that's the reason why. Consenting generally is starting to pick up slightly, and we're finding that there is a bit of movement in the industry. We're assuming that's just down to the fact that interest rates are indicating that they might drop. So that's a positive thing for the district. We are, as I say, we've been hammering out the CCCs, the co-compliance certificates, so we're getting on top of that, which was an area I was worried about. One thing I think is really encouraging on the A3 report is that we're not having to re-inspect quite so much as previously. So the engagement we've got with the building industry is showing results in that we've now got 61% of 62, I think, percent of all inspections we carry out pass first time. And it doesn't seem like a great difference, but if you go back only to April, we were down at sort of 35, 40%. And every time they fail, we might get paid for it, but it's extra work for us as well. The other exciting thing as well, we have got a remote inspection module, which we will be bringing online in the next couple of weeks. I had budget which we'd organised for that to cover that, and we're actually getting it quite cheaply. So we will be doing a lot more stuff remotely, which will make it cheaper and easier for the customer, and it will make it more efficient for us. So it means we can concentrate on everything else that we need to do, which to some extent is being slightly neglected at the moment because we just physically don't have the people. And the final thing I'll say, we're still actively investigating the use of AI to read plans and give us indicators of what needs looking at and what doesn't. So we're really trying to up our game. We're really trying to make ourselves more efficient. And the big takeaway for me is the interaction we've had with the industry, the fact that we give them a level of ownership, the way we approach stuff, an appropriate level of ownership, I would say as well, which has made us a more trusted partner, and it's bearing real fruit. Some of the people who used to spend their lives going around complaining about council and how prohibitive we were are actually on that group now, and they're saying, to be honest, guys, you know, they're working really well with us. So the future's bright. I think that the team are doing fantastically well, especially as we've had a few vacancies to fill, and I'm quite comfortable with where we are and where we're going.
Music to my ears. Any questions from the floor?
Thank you. What is do you know what the industry average is or standard is for the first time pass of building inspections?
I honestly don't. I can find out for you. From previous experience in a similar role, I would say that it's probably around 45%, but I will find out. I don't know if it's information we normally share, i.e. different BCAs, but I can find out for you. One of the things which actually isn't shown in this report, we've been doing a major review of all our quality systems since we brought on an external contractor using the budget we have for our own quality manager because we couldn't afford one. And it's been really encouraging. One, that they're finding stuff that we should have been doing slightly better, and we've already enacted it as soon as we find it. But the other encouraging aspect is that they're finding that generally we're performing extremely well. So again, kudos to the team. They really are maxing it. My biggest concern is that we need to get the new people on board so I don't get people burning themselves out, which is a problem they've had in previous years in that team. But again, it's down to their commitment to Southland, which I think is fantastic.
Councillor Duffy.
Oh, just a point I see in the media about the government considering private building inspectors. And I just think that as a council, we should perhaps be prepared to point out at the appropriate time that there was a $13 billion bill for leaky buildings last time they tried that. That's all.
And Adrian and I attended the first briefing with the Minister
Steve Pank, was it? Yeah, Tuesday. They gave us 3 hours notice, Mr Mayor, didn't they? That was cool. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think some of the stuff they're thinking about in this would be helpful to us. I don't think, hopefully, they'll go back to the 1990s where it was just a disaster. And I think the reason they won't go back to the 1990s, they'll get nobody to insure them. That's what killed it in the end, because they're getting so many claims against private people. The insurance company said, we're not going to insure them. One of the things they've raised, which links in with other stuff they're doing on hazard modelling, is something that we've suggested to some developers already. In fact, they're so confident that their developments aren't going to be affected by flooding, why don't they insure their developments for a set period of time? And this is a thing the government are looking at. So there are some positives to the stuff they're bringing out. I think at the moment it's a suck it and see and prepare our arrows should we need to fire any. But I'm confident that our guys are doing a very good job at the moment. And we'll just have to see what comes out of it. But yep.
We might need all the arrows for roading, so we might have to.
The arrows.
Thanks, Adrian. And while you're sitting there, we might as well move on to the
resource consents. Yeah, and this was always going to be mine, so I've got no excuse for this one. Okay, so as you know, I'm really proud of my resource consenting team. And just to put it in the context, during the last reporting period, we've had one of our staff members who's been completely away because, unfortunately, their husband got diagnosed with a terminal illness, so they've had to go off to India. And we've had another staff member who's been very, very sick a lot of that time. And we've also had 2 vacancies we've been carrying in. And despite that, they've just kept the hits rolling in. And you can see on the associated gaps that we're still up at 80-odd% on the actual within 20 days when we're at 85 in August, and then it shows we're down at 79.8 in September. But I've got some good news. Because you've got a pedantic regulatory group manager, I looked at the ones that are over time, and there were 4 over time. And 2 of these were ancient ones, which were like over a year hold, which had been with contractors, but they kept getting additional complexity sent to the contractors and saying, we need this done, we need this done, which pushed them over the time. And they both got spurred out about 34 days. There is an ability within the Resource Management Act under Section 37 that if added complexity is added, you can go as much as double the time you're entitled to actually process these consents. So what we do, we have to go back to the people who lodge the consent and say, look, you've actually made us run over with this. And so we've gone back to the private contractors who are dealing with those old consents and say, you need to apply for a Section 37. So it's likely that those 2 will be actually put in time. And it's not as cheating, it's as playing fair on the park. The other 2 that are over time, one was at 21 days. And when we looked at it, it was actually 16 days and the machine had gone crazy. So that one would be good. And the other one was at 25 days. So the end upshot is of the 4 we've got over time, the reality is one of those is over time by 5 days. And that was due to one of our staff being very, very sick and unable to complete a consent. And it was also a consent which really didn't hurt the applicant because it was removing a condition from their old consent which said they had to have a telephone line. So nobody got killed, nobody got pregnant. It wasn't that critical, but it was something that we needed to deal with. But that was the one that they had go over time in that entire month. And I just think that's cool. And it's not cheating, it's not bending the rules, it's not doing anything wrong. And again, by the way, we're not sticking any consents out to contractors outside of the organisation at the moment. So that team are overperforming. And I am worried a little bit about them overperforming to their own detriment. And I'm trying to sort that out now. And the good news for that team, and it'll be reported on in the next report, is that we've got 2 graduate planners who'll be joining us in the next sort of 4 weeks. It will, after a little bit of input, lessen the load on the actual team there. So we're trying to get as efficient as we can without killing the people who are doing the great work for us. But it's really, really good news. Invoicing is going well. We're getting money off people now. We're not having to pay them lots of money back, which is a thing we're always concerned about. And the backlog is getting eaten away. So we're always going to have consents that are owed. People can wait 10 years to actually enact a consent and they'll sit on hold. So that's just one of the tyrannies of that thing. But across the board, the team are doing extremely well, and I could not be prouder of them, to be honest.
Thank you, Adrian. And yeah, I mean, that's definitely getting reflected in the feedback I'm getting from the public as well, and even publicly in the newspaper. There's an article the other day where it was referenced the council was incredibly helpful to work with, so that's yeah, really positive. Thank you. I'm just conscious of time, and is there any pressing issues on that one for Adrian, or can we move him on to the environmental health and licensing? Pressing, so thank you.
So I suppose, thank you, sir. The environmental health and licensing, the team have always been operating at a pretty good level, even when they've had to carry vacancies. But we've now got a new senior environmental health officer, George Poole, who's come down to us from Waimakariri, previous experience in Christchurch City, and also as health protection officer, working for Te Whatu Order. Very good environmental health officer, slotted in nicely, and the team generally are doing very, very well. The one thing, talking about compliments in the paper, the Riverton off licence that was set up, there was a lot of good reporting back on that, and they reported how smoothly it had been working with council and how we were. So we've got a good team there. Our administrators in that team are phenomenal as well, Joe Affleck and Tracy. They just knock it out of the park. And a part of their roles as well, which is a slight overlap, is the dog registrations. And this year we've got more dogs registered quicker than we ever have. It might be a bit of messaging about a grumpy group manager who's going to find people. But we've actually got less than 100 dogs not registered now. And I'm informed that this time last year we were about 900. So something's going right. We've basically got a team of people across environmental health and in the animal control compliance area, which are public-minded people who talk to the public. And yeah, we get some bad people, we get some bad dogs, but we concentrate on them and let the people who are doing it right get on with their lives. So it's a busy time, but I'm really, really proud of that team as well. I'm just happy that I've got a group of people who really want to be here and do the job. And so I'm quite happy to answer any questions about specific.
Thanks, Adrian. We've got any, like it's just such a positive report that it's it's really great to hear and see those. I mean, that's a big jump, 900 down to 100. That's quite a significant leap, and I think that's going to be paying dividends throughout the district.
We issued infringement notices this year, and people said, "Oh well, it's a waste of time. You won't get any money. We've already got $5,000 in from infringement notices." And some will go to court, and some will get $2 a week for the next 5 years or something. But at the end of the day, it's not just about the money. It's about you've got a dog, you've got a responsibility, you've got to look after that animal. And good dog owners shouldn't be paying for bad ones.
Well, thank you, and thank you to your team as well. So pass on our regards and acknowledgement of their great work.
Thank you very much.
Well, you were there, I'd have given you the job.
So in Sam's absence, I'm going to hand over to Vibuti, our acting CEO, to talk the next two.
So the services and libraries team, just picking up on the thing that Adrian just mentioned around dog registrations, etc. I think there's a big kudos to that team. They've got it there in their service highlights. A role they played around that, which was they contacted customers that had not registered their dogs, which is not usual practice anywhere actually. So that was really good, and that brought about that led flurry. I was remarking on how much work goes on in that team. Like if you see the service requests that come in, there's a huge number that comes in, phone calls, emails that the team works through. So. And I think they've got quite a job in passing that on to the rest of the organisation. Also, a nod to the libraries and civic centres that we have across the district. They are our face into the community, and I think they do an awesome job wherever I've gone. Always there for the people. So that's that side of things. I take both of them, and then if there are any questions, I could think of. On the community facilities side, as you'll notice, there is a lot of work that has been done in the previous month's achievement side of things. Playgrounds, a bit of work has gone on there, and then they've got their priorities for the coming month, and I think a few things in there are what we've been waiting for a wee little while. I do know that there is a bit of recruitment that needs to happen in that space. So the team is working under a bit of pressure with, not full strength. So that does put pressure on everybody, but they've been doing a fabulous job. So here we are. Thank you. Thank you, Worship.
And I've just been thinking while you've been talking as well, like these A3s have been quite positively focused, and that's not actually bad. I think it's good for us to actually focus sometimes on what's right. We quite often focus the council on what's not right, but actually looking at the improvements that are happening across the board and acknowledging the success of what we're doing is quite important too. So it's good to have some positive reporting. Are there any questions for Vibuti, Councillor Runcorn?
No questions, but thank you. I was just going to comment on the checkouts at the library. I've spent a bit of time in the Winton Library. an increase in actual physical books going out, which is amazing. I just wanted to make a comment. I was in the Winton Library a couple of weeks ago, and Paula sent some young children to me, and a young boy said to me that the Winton Library is the best library that he has ever been to. So I just thought I'd pass that on, and it's a wonderful space that's being well utilised.
Cool. Well, getting close to the lunchtime now, so I'll look at the project delivery team, and we've got Hartley or Phil or both.
Thank you. Yeah, for the project, unfortunately Dave's sick today, so Phil's last minute calling to cover for the project delivery team. If there's anything particular, but I'll let Phil highlight a few points.
Yeah, so kicking off the new year, things are always a wee bit slow to get going. Getting on with final scoping, consenting, and then moving on to the to getting procurement underway. So we've got a number of jobs underway with procurement. The last of the rehabs going up today on Getz. We've got the first couple underway. Got a number of community facilities projects getting started. Procurement of the Tianea playground is underway. There was a meeting up there on Monday, I think. Tokanui Hall heating. The rehabs, as mentioned, Henry Park playground in Tianea, design and build of Lions Park, Paramia Bay playground. That work was deferred because of the winter construction conditions, so that's back underway now. Getting that one done. Completion of design and procurement for the Mossburn toilet, physical construction of the Ethel toilet, installation of the power shower at Riverton. Foundation for that was poured on Monday, I believe, with erection of the power shell programmed for Monday, Tuesday next week. Taramia Bay toilet, had the certificate of public use and code compliance, so that's all done and dusted now. Final of the Matariki project, Riverton is complete, just waiting on an opening for that. Bridge Inn Road, which was a bridge that was put on hold. It was the 13th bridge out of the 12 that were completed because of geotech issues. That has now been led to the contractor, and his design is underway for that, so it's going to be completed shortly. And just on top of that, it's not mentioned here, but we're just undertaking consultation again with the Alliance Freezing Works to get the Kirk Ryde Road Bridge back underway. So I had a meeting with the manager of Alliance yesterday, and we've just got to thrash out the liability details, and we sort of agreed in principle who was liable for what. So just have to get some guidance for our legal team to get a letter in place, and we'll be due to start that mid-November, to start the piling. The big risk with that one is the piling, vibration from the piling, rupturing the water main, which is about 40 odd years old and in a pretty fragile condition. So we've just got to tighten up the legalities around that, and we can start that one. Tianea Downs boat ramp, might as well have a wee chat about that. So that was agreed by council after the approval of the report on the 19th of June. So from there we went into contract negotiation with Tianea Earthworks, contract negotiation plan, asked them for pricing, thrashed out the conditions of contract, and we awarded that contract around about the 12th of July. And so they pretty much started straight away. And upon starting, we sort of got blindsided with a request from DOC to do an archaeological assessment. It wasn't part of the resource consent conditions, and that cost us about 10 days. We had to get an archaeologist involved, and they had to do a standover while we were excavating. So that was unfortunate because we got the resource consent about 15 months ago, and had I known that, I could have had time to have all that in place, and essentially it's cost us the ability to finish the job. It would have been finished by now. But having said that, we're about 65% complete with one slab below the water still needing poured. At the moment, the lake is sitting at current level of 203.36 metres above sea level. The ideal height for us to be operating is about 201.3. Since we started construction, the lake has come up approximately 3 metres. It got up to 104.1, which is probably the highest it's been, I would say, in 7 or 8 years, just off the top of my head. And we need a target to restart. Because we've poured all the slabs down the bottom, there's no need for anyone to go right to the toe of the ramp anymore. So we can, because the last slab's right up near the top, we can probably safely go back and behind the sheet piling with a lake level of about 202.3. It's currently sitting at 202.36, so we need to come down about another metre. And it's been, the last 2 weeks, it's come down about 350 mil. Came down a bit, but it went back up. It's raining up there all day today and again tomorrow, although not as heavy as what we've had in the last couple of weeks. But with the warmer temperatures, the snow is melting, and that's complicating the problem. So I'd like to be able to tell you exactly when it would be finished, but I can't, obviously. But we've done, when I was asked to talk, I went through all the dates and the times. We had 2 weeks for procurement after sign off by you guys. We pretty much started straight away. There was reinforcing steel needed to be ordered and bent specifically for that job. So after 3.5 weeks after we started, we had like over 50% of the concrete poured. So we did get on with it as soon as we possibly could to try and avoid this situation. But it is what it is, I guess.
Disappointing we got that 11th hour.
Well, that sort of blindsided us a bit. I did consider, to be honest, fighting Doc and saying, no, well, you should have made it a condition of the consent. Leave us alone, we're going to build this thing. But conscious of the fact that we need to negotiate the permits that we have to have these structures in the water. They're coming up in 2027, I think, for renewal. And the fact that we're wanting to put a floating pontoon next year at the Te Anea Terrace boat ramp. So we always try and maintain the relationships with our key stakeholders. So we just sucked it up and got on with it.
Sarah, did you have a...
Thank you, Phil. Answered my question from my email last night. I think that I totally accept your point around wanting to maintain the relationship with DOC, but this isn't the first instance of DOC actually imposing additional conditions, not necessarily on council, but DOC imposing additional conditions over and above a resource consent. So I do have concerns in that space. And I think, I mean, there are different ways to go about that discussion, but I think maybe as a more broader discussion, we actually need to get to the bottom of why DOC are now starting to impose conditions on people. As I say, it's not just SDC, other resource consent, because that's not fair on anybody. It's not fair and it's not reasonable.
Yeah, I think it's a conversation worth having with them. And like, there's a defined process that people can go through, which is the resource consent one, and that's the time to do it. And like Phil said, 15 months, we could have actually had that all organised. Councillor Sprague.
Yeah, I was just going to endorse Sarah's comment that we've had considerable trouble with DOC on the island with exactly the same type of situation. That you get permission and then suddenly they come in with all sorts of other requirements. It would be great if we can sort it out.
Yeah, and that's happening even when there are MOUs in place. I'm not saying there was an MOU necessarily here, but there was certainly an understanding that there was a resource consent in place. So I don't know who takes that on.
I've got a note, yes.
That's a note for you.
About how we progress.
How we
have that conversation.
that discussion. I think something needs to be done.
The frustrating thing was that we were replacing like for like.
Yeah.
The existing footprint had already been excavated with the original construction of the ramp. The only new excavation that we were doing was in an area that had been constructed as a car park, which was what we were using to pump our water from the dam into before it filtered back into the lake. So all the areas that we constructed had already been constructed, and we could have used the accidental protocol, discovery protocol that's in the resource consent. And we paid, I think we paid about a total of about $7,500 for an archaeological assessment, standover on site to find nothing. It was a waste of money.
And, yeah, and to that point, it isn't just time delays. It is additional cost on our ratepayers, time and effort for our staff, but also to other trusts and entities and enterprises where some of those have been fundraising. It's not acceptable to impose thousands of dollars additional cost. I think I would just like to try and understand the reason. What's the reason for imposing these additional requirements outside of a resource consent process?
Yeah, I think we need to have that conversation. I mean, obviously, it's a rhetorical question, but yeah, we do need to have that conversation to stop it from happening again, because it does have, like you say, ongoing consequences beyond just council as well. I'm just conscious of time, running over lunch already, and another 5 minutes. Was there anything pressing for Phil or Hartley on this one from anyone?
Oh, look, I just threw you, Worship. Yeah, I'm actually really confused by this. From a resource consent application process, I mean, you use the very valid point, that was a pre-existing, wharf construction, I presume, pre-1991 resource management, existing use. I'm very confused by that for a start, but I'm also really concerned by the example that you've just given, and the fact that Sarah's indicated that this is not the only issue around what appears to be a massive hole from a consultative perspective. Any number of examples going from the seemingly benign through to, nationally significant conversations, and to have an issue at the 11th hour, as it were, I thought that would sort of raise considerable alarm bells, and the cost associated with it, or I'm just really confused by the process. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, the only one that's really gone.
It's not fair.
I don't understand how can you get to a point where a resource consent can be processed, and then it's, you've gone through that scenario, and then after that's been granted, something can come in to say, well, actually, no. What are the legal implications of that? Where are the liabilities associated with that? And at this point, I'm very confused. I don't understand.
I guess the only thing as DOC is essentially the owner of the area that we're working in, so that probably gives them a bit of. It's not that should justify them being able to go outside of the process, but I think that's probably. I don't think Muriel Smith from up the street would be able to come in at the last minute and do it. I think I'm just making assumptions here, but.
I mean, DOC obviously, well, I'm making an assumption here, but I would have thought that DOC would have been one of the first cabs off the rank in terms of
timing of the consent,
the timing of the consent, or being going through the, whether it be DOC or iwi or, Electricity Corporation of New Zealand or whoever, who is being consulted, and if anyone has missed out, have we missed anyone out?
They're all notified.
They're all notified, so DOC is notified. So I'm a little bit uncomfortable about us sort of going, oh, well, they've come in and therefore they've seemingly stopped Meridian, stymied these issues, and then it's like, well, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think we need to get to the bottom of that so it doesn't happen again going forward. And yeah, I'll talk to the birdie after this, and we'll have a look at that.
Okay. Can I just get clarity? So there's no way to launch a boat at Te Anau Downs?
There was. We built a temporary ramp to the side of the new construction, using some of the old slabs off the old ramp, just for light boats, small, sort of 5 to 6 metre boats only. But we closed that probably about 3 weeks ago now because the levels were coming up that quick. And my worry was that the slabs we used were only very light, they're only 100 mil thick. They potentially float and shift, especially with a bit of wind movement. Nothing holding them in place other than a bit of gravity, but because of the depth of the water they were in, the gravity would be, they could shift, and the last thing we wanted was someone snagging their boat trailer or the rig of their boat or anything like that and causing damage. So it's closed at the moment.
Is there anything temporary that can be put in place? I guess like the significance for the Te Anau community, opening of fishing season, open of the Great Walks season, the annual fishing competition. Like, there's pretty big significant things for the town.
If the lake keeps coming down over the next couple of weeks, we'll be able to reopen that once we've inspected it, had a chance to have a look at it. But once again, it would be at users' risk and it's no liability of the council.
Cool. Just looking at Councillor Graney.
Yeah, just thank you, Worship. Just a quick question: how long will the last slab take to cure once you can?
Well, there's two ways we can do it. If we just pour it at standard 30 MPa concrete, we need about 7 days curing into it. If it's okay with the design engineer for us to put some concrete additives to enhance the strength early, we can get 10 or 15 days strength after about 3 with an additive put in that might cost a couple $100. So the last pour, when the water's low enough, we can get it.
Go for Labour Weekend.
We can. To be fair, we'll certainly do everything we can.
Okay, thank you. On the basis of that, can we get some comms out potentially around Labour Weekend and the fishing competition from council? Just because, and I think there can be discussion around what that comms might or might not contain. But I think everybody understands certainly the level of the lake, because substantial flooding still in town. But I think we need to signify early that might not be available for the fishing competition. And there are plenty of alternatives to get on the lake, but that is a particular popular one for that.
It's the only one that services the top half of the lake. It's an extra 30 odd k's from the bottom to get to that point.
Elsewhere.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Phil. Just looking at our time frame, which we've gone well over what I was predicting. We've got 2 A3s remaining, transport and forestry, and Stu's away at the moment, so we're going to try and be Stu for forestry. and sorry, water and waste, how can I forget Royal Grant sitting in the corner there. Do we have any pressing questions? Like, we can take the reports as read. Are there any pressing questions from the reports? We're just conscious to looking at the public excluded after lunch, so it'll be nice to. Sorry.
We've already discussed transport, so I think
Yeah.
we have a sort of picture there on that one.
Anything in the forestry or water and waste? Actually, we want to discuss them, and we can carry on after lunch with this, but my preference would be to go into public excluded and carry on with it. Is that Councillor Radencourt?
Mine was just a quick one around transport, but someone could email that through to me, the Tomagullock Bridge.
Yeah.
Options being presented in September. What, is it a new bill going in there or what is happening?
No, it's all right.
Curiosity.
So the Tomagullock, there's two aspects. One is I was referred to the Tomagullock Bridge, which is over the Tomagullock River, not actually on Tomagullock Road, but yeah, that's in relation to the gravel, and there's work with the ES that's underway. The latest update I had, I've got another update this Friday with them, was I suppose you can call it an options or report that's gone to the Steering Technical Advisory Group, and waiting on some feedback on that group around options on how to deal with the gravel bill.
So that's the only access for Tomagullock, isn't it?
Yeah, through that way it is. Yeah.
Is it the upper bridge or the Cattle Flat Road bridge?
So the Cattle Flat Road bridge in terms of the gravel. The one on Tomagullock itself is the one that's got a weight restriction on it. That's part of the 3-year program. But there's also gravel build up there. But in terms of the technical advisory group and working with the ES, it's more associated with the Piano Flat one.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
We're going to let Grant off the hook with any questions today.
That's all right. Just in regards to the Lumsden stormwater investigation work that was going on, there was a public meeting that I kind of got stitched up with recently, and talking about some nature-based solution opportunities as far as that stormwater network. There's been some contact to the catchment group from people with some concepts. So what would be the best way for them to engage into that investigation process to help?
Just get hold of Chief.
What's that?
Chief and I will try to have a meeting with them.
Yeah. Is there any?
It's not far from finished, to be fair. So
is that investigation work almost complete to go back to the
done?
Okay.
Just sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Cool. Cheers.
Thank you. If there's no further discussion on any of those reports, I will thank all of the team, and also I'd like to acknowledge for Bertie for coming in for Cameron while he's been away. And I'll move from the chair that will receive the management report. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Keast. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? That is carried. And just before I break for lunch, I will move the recommendation that we move into public excluded for items 8.1 and 8.2 for the items outlined in your agenda. I'll move that from the chair. Move a seconder. Councillor O'Brien. Is there any discussion on that motion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? That's carried. Thank you. Lunchtime. We'll come back at 1:20.